Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with a sit-down podcast with insert guest name, and today we are joined by Asmodeus, and this podcast is essentially just me calling up a friend saying, "Hey, how you doing? What you been up to?" And then we're gonna talk about a main topic, which is going to be a genre or a game. And in this one, we're gonna talk about ARPG, which is D4, Last Epoch, Path of Exile, and then we just see where the conversation goes. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. Hi, Asmodeus. How you doing? What have you been up to lately? And welcome in.
Yo, what up? I'm great. I've been enjoying some other games, taking a short break. But before that, I've been really enjoying PoE League. Even though the league itself, I'm not a fan of the mechanic, but I mean, the base game is still great. So I've been actually really enjoying the characters that I've been playing this league because I just chose them purely for what's fun. And I'm looking forward to the Diablo 4 Season 2.
That's fair. That's fair. Is that something like you normally do? Like just pick something that you want to play that's fun? Because I know you've done a lot of content when it comes to league starter builds and casual farming strategy guides to help the new and newer players. How do you weave that in when you just choose to play whatever's fun? Because I mean, those two doesn't always connect when it comes to the streaming aspects.
True. So the way I go about this is usually I have some kind of a plan for the league. Sometimes I have a plan predetermined. Sometimes I wait for the league announcement, and based on that plan, based on the content that I want to run, then I will fit the build to that, right? And then I try to usually make the build something that's going to be a solid starter. And I practice the leveling. I figure out the leveling process and the progression process, and then I make a guide for that, so that people who follow my content, they can just copy the same build that I'm doing, and they have like a good guide to follow with that. And that's usually going to be tailored to a specific strategy. So like this league, for example, I knew that I'm going to do legions because surprisingly enough, legions were actually one of the only things that I haven't done as like a league start farming strategy before. So I focused on legions in order to figure out like how people are making currency from this exactly. And for that, I picked the EK Ignite build because I think that's one of the better builds for clearing legions. And I started with the Wave of Conviction, very quickly transitioned to EK Ignite, had a blast, made a Headhunter, and then I did some other stuff. But this was very fun. I like EK is like EK Nova specifically is like my favorite skill, like in PoE
It's
of
funny
all
that you
time.
mentioned because like before I went softcore, I raced in hardcore for 5 years, and there were two prominent core abilities that we always used to use, which was EK Nova, and we also before that and during the time as well we used Blade Vortex. Right, people ran their Templar Inquisitors, and we had Rim Sorrow, 5k HP, 1000 energy, yellow face acro, just burning through everything with an aura bot, and you'd die if you got into one of those shrapnel bearers engagements. But other than that, it was
Yeah.
pretty fun. But yeah, I actually am a big fan. Like when it comes to like magic find and stuff like that, I do that very rarely. And there's only two different type of builds that I would like to play when it comes to magic finding, and one of them is Kinetic Blast Wandering, because I don't want to use the bow, or I would use EK Nova, because those are my two favorite builds when it comes to magic finding. It's funny you mentioned like Legion, because when it comes to like the top segment of like the best farming strategies to make stupid amount, like exceeding amount of currency. One of those things that
Yeah,
involves five-way running, which demands a headhunter. Did you dive into that
true.
at all, or just the farming of the splinters?
Just the farming. Well, splinters are actually not that much currency. I actually figured out kind of like a really good strat. I looked at other people who were like just the people who run Legion like every league. There are people who like they just go bow Legion every league. They live in dunes. And I looked at the numbers of like how much currency they're farming, like per map, per hour, and so on. And the strategy I was doing was actually performing surprisingly better than that. And so I think I was onto something, and it was pretty successful. And then so I made a headhunter in 2 days running that, and then later I ran this strategy again with an ice shot character and made a mirror in 4 days. So it was pretty juicy.
That's not bad
uh,
at all. Could you give like a
TLDR,
TLDR? Yeah.
yeah, TLDR, Blue Altars OP. Even if you don't get, I never got any divines, like ever. I never got
Uh-huh.
any like raw divines from the altars, but the amount of quantity and rarity that you get is just crazy. And I combined them. So I combined them with harbingers. So it's harbinger, legion. Add to that also breach. It just adds so many monsters. You just get so many like random divination cards that are worth so much money. And then also to that, betrayal, right? So betrayal was crazy amount of money. Like every mastermind fight does like 6-7 divines, right? So and if you can do them pretty efficiently, it adds up super quickly. So those mechanics combined, I have a video on this strategy. It was like how I made a mirror in 4 days or something like that. That's my recent video, and explain the entire strat if anybody wants to run that. It's very, very fun as well.
Would you say that's hard to pinpoint? Because like I also have quite a few content when it comes to like farming strategies and helping people navigate the jungle of making currency. Like a mirror, for example, depending on what time frame of the league, it becomes very very hard to say. Well, in 4 days, but like if I take a look at Mirror of Calandra right now, they started off around what 25,000 chaos, and right now they're running around 135 to 140,000 chaos mark right now. Let's see if I can get that in divines.
That was when they were. I think I paid 450 divines, something around that, 460, something like that.
That's pretty good considering what's the mirrors going for right now. They kind of skyrocketed lately. Let's see if I can get divines. They're 600 now, but like last week they were around that 450 mark, I think.
So yeah, it was like more than it was like if you're pushing, you can make like with that strat like 100 divines a day, like playing like I don't know 8 to 10 hours or something like that.
That's fair. I mean, that's still really really good.
It was one of the best like ever farming strats that I've done. The only thing that was better than that for me was I think Heist.
I hate Heist so much. But would you say like you mentioned like the quantity and rarity from the blue altar is massive, but I mean you would be able to get the quantity and rarity from the red altars as well. So what would you say makes the blue altar the best? Because I mean, if for those of you who don't know that's listening in either live right now or on YouTube later, one of the differences is the type of rewards you can get. So Asmodeus mentioned earlier, you didn't get a divine one, and what that means is that you drop pure divine orbs from the blue altar. It's a very rare one. I've only seen it once myself, and the problem for me is that those type of currency rewards that the blue altar provides are either hit or bust kind of levels, because you get like the scrap bubblegum currency, or you get the big ticket, whereas the red one allows you to get things like chaos orbs, for example. Would you say that yeah, I'm gonna go for that.
Yeah, so basically it boils down to what are you scaling on the map, right? And the strategy that I was running was scaling things like, for example, harbingers. So all of the shards, the quantity and rarity, Legion chests also, the quantity and rarity of the area applies to them. So not necessarily the like static rewards, right? That like you get from the Legion guys, but everything else it applies to. Same with breaches, right? So as far as I know, breach hands also have the quantity and rarity applied to them because it's basically a chest, right? And it's a area quant, which should apply to that. Your character quant doesn't apply to boxes, but the area quant does. So you end up dropping a lot of these divination cards. Like you have the fortunate card that you just drop like 1 or 2 every single map. All of the splinters are increased, right, in quantity as well, and you're just scaling all of these things. Like even things like generic uniques, you get way more with that strategy than other things, which is especially valuable early on in the league. So just every single thing that you make currency on just basically drops more. You get more incubators, for example, right? You get more of everything that makes you currency. And if you're scaling good stuff, like like for example, fractured shards, right? That's a huge amount of currency, right?
Oh yeah.
And even just the ancient and annual shards give you a lot because you sell them in bulk for divines. So just the sheer amount of good stuff that you're farming makes it so that the like quantity and rarity for the area is very much worth it.
But isn't it like the same kind of like I might be wrong because it feels like I have a bad take on this, but it's like the differences between the red and the blue altar, because I'm under the impression that the quantity and rarity bonus that you get is the same on both, but the difference is more about the rewards. Or are you saying that the blue altars you get more quantity and rarity gains compared to red?
Yes. Well, you have a higher number because of the passive, right? What's the passive on the tree?
You think about the eldritch gaze for the double effects?
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, that makes sense. There you go. Okay, sorry. Now, because I know for a fact that blue is considered better because of these things. I just forgot what the actual difference was. But so for those of you listening, and what we're saying is that there's a node on the tree called eldritch gaze, which makes it so that the eldritch altars for the blue one, Either Worlds, has an additional downside, but it also makes it so that the upside is 50% higher scale, and the equivalent on the red version is that you have a 50% chance to gain an additional upside. The influence by the ascending exile, which also have those that have an additional upside have a 100% increase effect of the downsides, and because of this, the blue one is just better simply.
Yeah, and over time, there's also you have to factor in things that in a short term you won't even see, right? In the short term, on the red ones, you're gonna see, okay, I got like some awakened sextons and some chaos. Okay, that's better, right? But in the long term, you're not seeing, okay, where like you're not getting, for example, the Sephiroth cards, right? Which are, I farmed like multiple of them because you get these modifiers that give you chance for eldritch monsters or for the boss or whatever to drop divination cards that grant you currency. So that can be, for example, mirror card, right? That can be the divination, like divine orb cards and stuff like that, right? You get lots of different things like that. The duplication as well, right? You get lots of duplication modifiers, which also it's hard to account for until you actually run a lot of maps and you have like a large sample size to see like the numbers afterwards. Yeah.
Well, there's another factor to it as well that one of mods brought up. Like the blue version actually has a higher quantity of modifiers that gives quantity and rarity. I didn't know that. But the biggest one is that the downside effects from the blue version, Either World, is often more cases than not less detrimental than the red ones. Like you could get the Flask one meteor in your ass and stuff like that. Like because of that, it makes the red one much harder to navigate through, so that the blue ones, if you see a quant rarity modifier, you're able to just take that and you don't have to think much more about it, whereas the red one, you actually have to look at the modifiers to another extent. At the same time, outside of the generic rewards like Awakened Sexton, Chaos Source versus, with that occasional divine that you might get once or twice during the course of a league, it's the eldritch currency, because like if you look at Grand Eldritch Ichors for the blue, they're like 6-7 chaos, whereas the red one's like 8-9-10 chaos instead. So there's definitely like a pro of running the one that fewer people are running. But like you mentioned, the
also
idea,
patience, right?
Like you mentioned, the idea is to focus on the beneficial gain of running that the blue Eldritch has more to do with the increase of the other type of currencies that you're scaling through the quantum rarity, more so than the static rewards provided by the actual Eldritch. So that definitely makes sense. I like that approach for sure. So when it comes to like farming Legion and whatnot, would you say that that's your favorite ones that the actual best one that you've done so far, or do you have other strategies that you would have preferred to do that you've done in the past?
Yeah, it's one of the best for sure. I like to switch it up, right? So I like running a lot of different things. Actually, I'm very much like I feel like I'm an anomaly, because a lot of people always they either are, oh, I play minion builds, or oh, I never play minion builds. I would never play a totem build. I have bows. I only play bows. Bows are my life. Like people usually have they're in some kind of a camp. And I'm actually one of the few players who just plays everything, right? So I play minion builds, non-minion builds, totem builds, everything. Sometimes I boss, sometimes I map, sometimes I do heist, sometimes I do hideout hero. So I like to have like a very broad understanding of the game, and then go as deep as I can at a time. Certain things I just went much deeper than others. Like speaking of going deep, Delve, I think, is the last bastion of like mechanics that I haven't conquered. Delve is like the one last thing that I haven't really interacted with enough to be like, competent at it.
That's fair. I mean, I'm more of a caster build oriented type of player. The problem with the way I play is that there are very few people in the community that deep dives minions to the extent that the select few individuals are doing. Not long ago, I could count the amount of people that are deep diving minions to the extent of providing that lack of knowledge that is not available in game from the game itself. I could count those on two hands. And with recent years, we've lost people, like K Gaming, Uberly, Angry African, Leary93, and the list goes on with a couple of others on top of that. So now we're in a position where the select few people that remains in the community that is deep diving minion information to the extent that the community actually needs you could count them in one hand. So
Yeah,
I've
makes
always like
sense.
taken it upon myself so that every time I league start, my first job is to go through everything with minions. Once that is tackled, then I can do whatever I want. I can do my craft stuff that I'm doing now. I can say, hey, I want to do this build or that build. But GG has recently switched things around where they are not really shaking up the meta as much as they used to. So they have like every second league, they're going to
True.
have fewer changes, and every second league, they're going to shake the meta up properly, right?
Mhm.
So because of that, that means that every second league, I will basically already have done everything with minions, which is what happened now. The only problem here was the rework of the Guardian, which allowed us to have a bunch of other minion builds. So I've actually have played 0 witches this entire league. I've only done a bunch of Guardians because that's the only thing I haven't tackled with minions because it's new, right? And
Yeah.
now that I'm done with that, I was considering to do some Headhunter, but Diablo 4 is around the corner. Dev stream was here, and we get the patch notes in 2 days from now. So there's that as well. But I've actually considered to league start Magic Find next league, depending on the patch notes. Of course, we'll see if there's mini stuff I got to tackle first.
What build?
Like I mentioned before, there's only 2 main builds that I genuinely enjoy doing that with, which is EK Nova or Kinetic Blast. And I never like playing with bows. So the reason I like Kinetic Blast is I can use a wand for it, right?
And you can shield charge.
Yes,
as well.
absolutely. Yeah. But then again, the way I felt when it comes to magic finding has been in the past. You could have a bit of magic find, and you can alch and go, and that would be actually noticeably performing or improvement to your general currency per hour kind of approach. And in recent times, it feels more and more that you kind of have to juice your maps properly to actually make benefit of it. Because a non-magic find character can juice a little bit more than a poorly geared magic find character, and then you actually benefit more from the juice you're doing compared to that little magic find on a less juiced map, which is like it's kind of brought us to a position where I don't feel like I'm making enough of value for my time invested unless I'm juicing the maps. And when I get to that point, I feel like I need to have proper actual gear on my character. So I personally refuse to play magic find if I don't have a headhunter. Hence the shirts.
Yeah, it kind of on one hand, you do get like more benefit the less quant you have, but on the other hand, like you said, you still want more quant to just benefit from all the juice that you're putting into the map to just it kind of makes this like you either want to like go hard on it or not. Makes sense.
No, I definitely agree with that. So taking that aside, I mentioned that with Diablo 4 with the dev stream. How interested are you in D4?
I'm pretty interested. Like, okay, I like the combat of Diablo 4. Okay, I very much enjoyed it, and I like the game. I think the game is great. I think the developers need to get some like smart people, and same for PoE, by the way. Both PoE and Diablo, like both GG and Blizzard, I would love if they got some like smart people from the community that they can have access to, that they can ask questions, that they can have like as a voice of the community instead of listening to Reddit. Because what happened with Blizzard and listening to Reddit, they kind of are shooting themselves in the foot with some of the changes, right? So, for example, people were bitching about the scaling, right? Which I think the scaling was a great idea. I love the scaling, okay? There are so many good things that come from that people are unaware of, that because like how if you ever go to like subreddit for PoE, people always complain, give us another way to level, we always have to do the same campaign, always have to do this in the same way, please let us like level in many different ways. Boom, problem solved. Scaling just solves everything. You can level however you want. You can go to dungeons over and over. You can do campaign. You can just do side quests. You can just run around the world. You can do whatever you want, right? So it kind of solved that issue and made the game way more replayable in that sense. And then when you get to Nightmare Dungeons, when you get to like content that actually starts to matter to the actual end game, it doesn't exist anymore because you just go into a certain tier of Nightmare Dungeon, which has a set level, so the level scaling is not affecting that at all. So it doesn't really matter. Who cares if like you're level 15 and level 5 sorcerer came and did more damage to you to some mob and you're gonna cry, right? People cried about that. So what they did is they made it so that now the world scales in a different way, where the higher level you are, you start to outscale it in the open world. And the consequence of that is that the mobs are lower level, and now they actually grant you no relevant XP. no relevant items because they're too low level. So now people immediately complain, oh no, the monsters in the open world are too low level. Now there's no point to killing them, right? So just the community asked for a change, and now they're complaining about the change, right? So I feel like they just need to kind of like hardline some things and, you know, still listen to, especially when it comes to like QL. I'm very happy that they're adding like a like search bar and things like that should be there from the beginning. So that's very good that they're doing that. And it's great that they're listening, and they're making a lot of good changes in a positive direction. But I feel like there needs to be some better way of getting feedback from the community, because listening to like this screeching people on the internet who are ass mad about some like super unimportant things is not the way.
I think that's fair. I think that there's obviously different takes on it, and depending on what kind of pool of player base you belong to, and you know, Diablo 4 is catered to a lot of people that has never played the genre, which is why you had this issue with people like, yo, why do I have to play a new character every 3 months?
Oh my
you know?
god, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's for people who's never played the actual genre before, to know that there is seasonal content. That's how they play games, keeping up with the retention and longevity. Either way, taking that aside, I think that a lot of people that were talking about, oh, in ARPG, you're supposed to be like, yo, I killed that, now I can progress to the next stage, and if I had troubles with something I couldn't beat before, now I'm stronger just because I'm higher level, I can go back to beat that motherfucker that killed me last week. You know, I understand that aspect of it, but it also creates this scenario where you can go through. I think what people wanted was that the leveling would be that certain areas or acts would have caps. So once you got to a certain stage, it would be like, say, the last act would be unscaled, so to say. That would make more sense. But like you mentioned, they just listen to the community and be like, oh, we're just going to cap the world tier 3, 7, what was it, 55, world tier 4, 75 or something, I think they mentioned. And it just feels like they made a band-aid solution, because once you get to the point where the world monsters, the world tier 4 is capped at 75, you have no interest in doing anything in the open world unless it's Helltide already. You're already doing Nightmare Dungeons. At that point, the scaling doesn't matter. I think that I would have rather seen level caps exist than the earlier world tiers, where you're not farming something to farm experience. You're not farming something to farm, well, actually you are, but not for items specifically, right? That's something that would belong in like world tier 3 and 4. So if they had like 1 and 2, would have like, well, this act is capped here, this act is capped here, and that act is capped here, then you would have a natural progression. Like you finish Act 1, oh, I'm going to farm a dungeon. Okay, but now I'm out leveling this dungeon, time for me to move to the next area, create some more variations in your progression. I think that would have made more sense, and I think that's what people kind of wanted. But like you mentioned, they more like MMO zone type of approach to it, because it is an MMO game. They've emphasized that several times over. But like you mentioned, they listen to the community, and you know, they just put a solution in, or they introduce what the community asked for without really caring what the impact of it actually is. That's how it feels. And another prime example,
because the community doesn't know, they're not game designers.
Yeah, a prime example of it is like during the beta, the first beta. People were saying that minions were too strong, but that was during a sample pool of only having access to Act 1, only having a cap at level 25. And yes, minions were too strong. They were tanking things several levels above them, so you could kill some of the strongholds several levels below. In World Tier 1 and 2, I mean, hello, that's... like, it's not even the game.
It doesn't really matter that much,
No. Exactly. And what did Blizzard do? Well, they nerfed the living shit out of their survivability. And then the next beta came around, which was capped at level 20. And now, compared to the previous beta, we didn't have that influx of super high drop rates of unique items, or legendary items, either. And now people were like, Reddit was on fire like it always is, but more so than ever. And being like, oh, they're too much, they nerfed it too much. And I'm like, I don't understand why they would nerf something based on player feedback that has access to a fraction of the game. And they were like, they didn't even play test it. If they had a dev go in 15, 20 minutes, they would have realized that this was too much. They just smacked a random number, and people were praising them. Oh, they're listening to the community. And then Reddit was on fire. It was too much. And then they proactively reactively, you know, fixed that. And then the community praised them. Like, what?
Exactly.
I mean, hello?
It's like a knee-jerk reaction, and Reddit is basically like a little baby throwing a tantrum, and at any point you cannot satisfy them as well, right? And
and it was one of the higher ups that went down without saying any names, made a tweet and saying balance is not a destination, it's a journey, and it takes time to get it right. And
Well,
I'm looking at it and thinking, this is a AAA company making millions upon millions upon millions of dollars in net profit revenue, and they couldn't afford to put one dev for 15 minutes to playtest something that they wanted to change. And then they're summing that up as, well, balance is not a destination, it's a journey. I'm like, it's your fucking job to make sure the changes are reasonable.
Like they're supposed to be the authority, right? Same with GGG, right? Like GGG is the ones who are supposed to know how things work, who are supposed to know what is gonna be good balance and so on. But yeah, going back to PoE, I have some things I wanted to ask you. Okay, some things are okay. First question is gonna be very random, but I wanted to know, maybe you know, okay, because you have some channels of communication, okay, to the people who deal with minions. Tell me, what could be the possible reason for the nerf that removed the zombie size? You know, the zombie increased size from the cluster jewel notable. Like you could stack it and make like giant zombies for fun. Why did they remove that?
It's a combination of reasons from what I've been hearing. It's the same reason why they capped Headhunter size character capped as well. I have no idea if it's because of performance or whatever it is. But you have to keep in mind that it goes to my understanding, again, from what I've been hearing, is that the main reason has more to do with the same argument they have as to why they don't want people to have mods for the game. They want people to watch a video or watch a stream with people playing Path of Exile, and it's gonna look exactly like Path of Exile. Because if you go to a WoW stream and or a video with World of Warcraft in the background, most people will see that as well because it's been around for so long, sure, but not always, because one interface to another can look like it's black and white. One could be super minimalistic, and the other one can have fancy fucking anime waifus and strippers dancing on one pole. That's your life bar. The further below, the less clothes she's wearing, the lower HP you have. That kind of stupidity.
We're gonna get that mode.
I'm assuming that exists, by the way. So I'm just saying, like,
yeah. So that's what I thought. Okay, but here's the counter argument to that. That's actually really bad for them. That's actually bad for promoting the game. PoE is like, people share these clips, people share this, oh my god, he has got a crazy giant character, what the fuck is this, I gotta check out this game. It creates interesting moments that people share, and then it markets their game, right? So I think that was actually a really cool thing that was in the game, because it didn't really, I don't think it matters for performance. I don't think it does that much for performance. Maybe I'm wrong in some way, right? But there's lots of things like that feels like they are removing, that it just hurts their game growth, right? And I've made a bunch of videos for like feedback for GGG, right? And I try to give like very constructive feedback, talking about, okay, here are the issues that the game has, here's how I think they could be fixed, right? And here's why. And one of those things, I have like a few of these things written here, right? And one of these things was the league mechanic presentation, for example, right? So I heard you talk about something like that for Diablo. Like, Diablo trailer was not that hype. They didn't really show like that much of like the bosses themselves, or like what's gonna be in the game to like hype people up and so on. GGG has a little bit of a different problem. So what they're doing is, I don't know if you remember, if you compare, for example, like a Sentinel League, right? Sentinel League, how do you remember it? As a good league? Pretty good league, right?
It was pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, it's like everybody enjoyed Sentinel, right? People liked it. People played it for a long time. It was very nice. But the presentation of it, if you were in the Twitch chat during that time when they were announcing it, people were spamming Resident Sleeper. People were so bored. It's just Chris talking about like a blue circuit board, and here the Sentinel can be slightly more like this, and here you connect the circuit board, and he talks for like half an hour about that, and nobody knows what the hell is that. Nobody has any context for that, right? It's such a bad presentation. And the league actually had pretty poor numbers in the beginning, but the retention was pretty good. And the opposite of that was, for example, Scourge, right? Scourge had a really cool presentation as a league, right? You press a button, you get teleported into the demon world, and you fight demons, right? That felt so cool. That was super amazing. It's very easy to understand, and that is like, wow, that's super crazy cool. And then the retention was like meh, because the mechanic of like baking items didn't really give you anything. It was not balanced properly. But the whole fact that you could have like some kind of a skill tree progression, and you could fight the demons, you press the button, cool animation, that was really, really cool, right? So the same thing, like for example, with the current league, when they were presenting it on the Exile Con as well, right? Also, like Chris was talking about these, you can have these champions, have these things, and like the minutia of like micromanaging these different things that don't really matter overall, because you just click on totems, you just spam click to confuse the AI, and that's the league mechanic. I'm not really a fan of this league mechanic because it doesn't feel like PoE to me. I don't know about you, but
I'm in
it
the
doesn't
same
feel
boat.
like PoE.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah. So I was streaming and I was talking about this, and I said, okay, chat, I'm gonna start a timer, and in 5 minutes I'm gonna design a better league mechanic. Okay, and it actually took me 3 minutes. Okay, so here, chat, here is the league mechanic. Okay, it's called the Rift. All right, so I don't know if you know League of Legends, how the void thing, like you have Vel'Koz and you have the Rift Herald, this like purple thing, like purple void energy thing. So imagine you're walking into a map, and you have like a rift, like a crack in the space, right? And you have some NPC there, and it's like, hey, Exile, can you help me? There's a horde of demons from the void, from the rift, that are trying to break into our world. But I have this magical fucking rune dagger. If we like just break it a little bit, we let some of them in and kill them, it's not gonna overwhelm us. So we're gonna overall deal with the process, with the problem much easier, right? So okay, she gives you this rune dagger. And now you have the ability to click on this rift and you open the rift, right? So you go into a map, you have a rift, you click on it, it opens, monsters come out, right? Kind of like a type of a breach, type of something like that, right? The higher level, the more of these rifts you have in one place, right? So first you have 1, then you have 2, then you have 3, up to 5 in like T16s, right? So you have more monsters coming out. Then the rune dagger, right, itself, it's like you can put runes on it. And these runes is basically like a skill tree, so you can specialize. You can put one rune that makes it so that you spawn more monsters out of every rift, or more rare monsters, or you can have higher level monsters, right? So you can have higher level items from them, right? So basically get monsters in maps. You can specialize in what they drop. You can maybe specialize also what types of items they drop, so they're more likely to drop bows or boots or whatever else, right? And they, of course, also have a chance to spawn a boss, right? So you have a boss that spawns, you start fighting this boss, you kill him, you think you kill him, but he transports you to a void world. This is second phase, you kill him again, and he gets you some loot, right? And then you have crafting currency associated with that, right? So you have currency that, let's say it's an orb of improvement, okay? And you can improve item modifier up to a certain point, right? And this is another concept, actually, I want to talk to you about in a moment. The limited progressive crafting, okay? I want to sell you a concept of crafting, and I want to know what you think about it. But yeah, so league mechanic like that, this is what people want from PoE, right? They want monsters and maps. They want some kind of a progression. They want a reason to make their characters stronger, right? So you can specialize in this dagger, get the runes to make the monsters like higher level, so it's harder to kill them, but they give you more rewards, but you have to have a better character, right? So this is what people want, right? It's like you can tell that this is what people want based on player numbers as well. Like I've heavily looked into like the player numbers, right? And when was the game growing, and when was the game stagnating, and when were the numbers going down? And you can tell when they introduced like the better Atlas end game, and it was the Harvest League, and then it was Heist and Ritual, right? And then Ultimatum. So those leagues, we had player numbers going up. Then they removed fractured map farming. Player numbers go down and just stay down. Then we have 315, player numbers go down even more. Scourge brought them up a bit, and now we are still like stagnated at the same level. And recently we had a good league, Crucible, right? Crucible had a lot of players because of Diablo 4. The refugees that's just coming to PoE, right? But that's not, so the game stagnated, right? But the game was progressing very, very well. They were adding things, and one of the main things I think that enabled that was the fractured map farming. So like an end game aspirational content that you have a reason to make a very strong character, and that actually is rewarding. Another reason for that was progressive crafting, right? So in Harvest League, this was the only league in Harvest and in Ritual afterwards, where Harvest was still available as well after like 1 league break. It was the only league where I had people message me, tell me, hey, I actually crafted things this league. I actually crafted my own items. It was actually not that hard. Oh, actually, it's fun and cool to craft my own items. I didn't know you can do that, right? This is the first time that I look at an Awakener orb, and it's not 3 Exalt Profit or whatever. It's actually a thing I can use, right?
Yeah.
So that was really, really cool. And it enabled, you could see like, enabled a lot of build variety, because people could play just whatever build they want, and they could make their items that otherwise was just not available on trade, right? So they could scale items. They could craft like influenced items because they needed some like dot multi or something on every item, and in order to make the build viable, but they couldn't find these items available on trade because it wasn't meta, so they couldn't play it. But in the Harvest, they could do it. But the problem with Harvest, just like with Recombinators, was that they allowed way too much power, right? So they allowed players to do crazy stuff. But you can limit it. You can just, I don't know why GG refuses to limit things. Like, you can make it so that you can add a modifier on an item, but up to a certain tier, or only up to a few times, right? Maybe you can use a certain currency on an item only 3 times, based on item level, right? The lower item level, maybe you can use it once, higher twice, and the highest 3 times, right? And you can like improve item. Because what I have problem with, and this is why I'm pretty confident I could almost like double PoE player numbers in a year or 2, right? By doing changes like this. Progressive limited crafting, okay? So this is the idea that if a Bob the noob goes into a map and he finds an amulet, okay, and the amulet has some accuracy and some resistances, awesome. This is what he needs, right? He needs some accuracy. Okay, how does he now put like reduced mana cost and life on it, right? He can only choose one. He cannot meta craft it. There's no open suffixes. It would be too expensive to craft a shitty item like that anyway. So why can't he just like put some life on it? Why can't he like put a tier 3 life on an item that he wants by just farming something and then getting the currency and then being able to put that on an item? But meanwhile, we have recombinators where we can merge, mirror, and corrupted items together, creating like an insane fucking mirror tier crazy shit. But Bob cannot put it like a tier 3 life on his item. That's just ridiculous.
So quite a few things. Let's tackle the crafting part first that you mentioned. I've been a big advocate when it comes to allowing the spectrum to be flipped upside down. And the reason what I'm talking about is basically what you're saying. The lower amount of currency, or the new player friendly, or the new player approach of crafting and making your own items, is a slot machine fiesta. You're re-rolling everything. It's all about RNG, getting lucky. And the more currency you spend, each increment of difficulty and cost of crafting it, you are doing one of 2 things. You're either removing modifiers from being able to roll, or you're increasing the chances for the mods you want to roll, like fast souls and whatnot, guaranteeing a mod through a fraction mod, or guaranteeing through an essence, all of those things. And certain items at the higher end is even close to 100% deterministic, like a Tailwind Elusive Onslaught boots. There's only one modifier. You can brute force it, and there's only one out of those 6 modifiers that is going to be RNG based. There's a lot of layers of RNG getting there, but you can guarantee Tailwind Elusive with a random suffix, and then you obviously have the risk with the removal of Reforge, Keep, and Pre, be able to create a guaranteed elusive on the, because you get Onslaught and Tailwind suffix, and you can guarantee elusive prefix, and then you'll have to do a suffix can't be changed in null worst case to make sure that's the only other prefix, and then do a suffix can't be changed, Ashing Slam 50-50. If it bricks, well, you just Reforge crit and repeat the process. You then have a 1 in 14 to not get the movement speed with a life or mana block on that. So it's extremely low probability, and if that happens, well, you guess what? Suffix can't be changed and null, repeat the process, and then you bench craft life. So you have your 5 out of 6 modifiers guaranteed. That's a very expensive craft, but it is as close to deterministic as you can get. But if you want to craft like a pair of boots on a low end, well, what do? Well, you might maybe smack some essences, or you alch it and pray. There's so much RNG. So I would like to see is that the bigger and harder the item is, the more RNG is involved and more luck you have to have, or you have to spend an obnoxious amount of currency, whereas the lower end would be more deterministic. And the current crafting process goes in hand with what you've been saying. So something that I've been talking about is to allow certain crafts, maybe harvest or something, augment a certain craft that you could target. You can do this, but it can never go below a certain tier or above a certain tier, like the tier
Exactly.
capped crafting.
Exactly, right? It's some kind of a limitation. Yeah, exactly. Because you can arbitrarily limit it in so many different ways, right?
Item
But they're
level
like,
is a great example of that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
They're
that's
like refusing to do that for some reason.
yeah. I mean, obviously it's quite a lot of work, but I mean, I'm not sure if they're 100% refusing. But since they haven't done it, and it's been something that's been talked about for quite some time, we can assume that it's not something they're interested in putting into their vision. So no, I definitely agree that crafting should be made more accessible for new and newer players. But then again, crafting is not that hard for new and newer players. The problem is that most new and newer players, they are more interested in coming home from work, 9 to 5 job. I've said this before. They cook some food, they put the children to bed, the doorbell rings, it's their wife's boyfriend, they go to the bedroom and the player goes to their computer and he plays some games and kills a monster for a few hours and, go to bed, rinse, repeat the day after. And I mean, that kind of player base, they don't want to spend hours upon hours upon hours or even days or weeks to learn something. And learning crafting is very easy on the low end, but there is also not that much knowledge out there. The information and knowledge is out there. I mean, I'm not sure how many guys you have on that, but I have tons of it. There are other guide creators that have tons of these guys as well. The information is there, but the interest or desire and patience to go through it is the problem. But that's when it comes to crafting, right? And another thing you talked about was the player retention, the league mechanic you described. I mean, that sounds like a great idea, but you also have to keep in mind that having several league mechanics being essentially the same thing, you click on something, you spawn monsters, you kill them, is going to be very boring. A lot of people love Sanctum. I am in the same boat like you are when it comes to Trial of the Ancestors, but I have the exact same opinion on Sanctum. I think that both Trial and Sanctum are great league mechanics. I genuinely think they're great because a lot of people enjoy them. I don't like doing them because I don't feel like I'm playing an ARPG when I go in and do it. And because of that, I don't like engaging with it. So I barely touch Sanctum and I barely touch Trial of the Ancestors because I don't enjoy them. But a lot of people do. So I think it's good that those options are there. Because something that GGG does very well compared to other ARPGs is obviously the fact that an ARPG games is by definition the pure insanity. You're supposed to do the same thing over and over and over and over again, and hope you drop that Exalt or Divine or a Mirror. And what GGG does so well is creating distracting features to distract the players from knowing that they're actually doing the same thing over and over again by having this vast amount of mechanics that they can engage with. And thanks to the skill tree, they can also cater their experience to be like, hey, I want to do essences in this now. Oh, I'm bored of this. Let's do something else. Like I'm getting bored because I now realize that I'm doing this over and over again. I want to do something else. I can just change my tree, and suddenly I am farming legions, for example, or I'm doing boss hunts or boss kills through Maven. There's so many things allowing you to distract yourself from the fact that you're actually doing the same thing when you're changing your strategy, but it feels different. But that also comes down to what you mentioned with the player retention, where things like aspirational content, high end game juicing. Oh, you could do this. You can do these big things in the end game, but those are better for the growth of the game. But something we have to keep in mind when we say that is obviously the fact that I know Chris Wilson gone out in public and said that every time PoE has like big peak players playing or spikes in these numbers, that is a vast majority, almost exclusively, is covered by returning players. It's just a higher percent of returning players rather than new players. And that just means that for whatever reason, other games might not be launching, or the game mechanic and the hype up for it was good enough to do so, and then the quality of that mechanic is retaining.
Players are excited. Players have to be excited for some reason to come back. That's true. Like I can totally see that because they always have some kind of an influx of new players for whatever reason. Well, sometimes new leagues, sometimes someone promotes it, sometimes they pay some streamers to play it or whatever. So they have like a steady influx of new players, but when a league does very well in numbers, it's a lot of the time because of the returning players, right? So that's why I think having content that players are excited to aspire to do, or to be excited to do in general, I think is pretty good. And they also tend to one thing they could do slightly differently to accomplish that a little bit better would be to make the rewards of the league mechanic slightly better at the beginning and then nerf them rather than release them in a nerfed state and then buff them. I think the other order would work slightly better, because if you have a friend, right, who also plays PoE, or maybe you don't play PoE, but someone is telling you, hey, come play PoE, this league is gonna be great, just get in while this is good, right? You're gonna be excited because, okay, I'm gonna try it now. It's a good time. Okay, if now is a good time, I'm gonna try it now, right? But if you're gonna hear, hey, come back in a week or two when they fix the bugs and the loot is gonna be actually appropriate, then you're like, okay, fine, maybe I'll try it in a week or two, So you're not excited to do that, right?
Well, there's other factors to that. Like, I agree. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here to defend DDD like a shill here, but I will say that there are other features which can be very easily translated to some of the decisions made by Diablo 4, for example. 2-second longer cast time of exiting the dungeon. When you have millions of people playing the game, and every time they exit the dungeon, that's going to take you 2 seconds extra longer time. That means that in the end result is that you're going to have a metric that's going to tell you that your player base is playing more hours, days, weeks, years of playtime longer because of that feature. So if they would
It's a
introduce
very short-term approach,
Oh yeah, but if they introduce a league mechanic, and knowing for a fact that some people, they only play like one character, and when they finish their goals of the league, might be challenges, or they min-max their character, when they're done with that, they're done. They're not going to continue playing another character, like some people will do that. And knowing those features and those metrics, making it so that you're not overwhelmed, or you're getting a tsunami of free shit the first week or first couple of days of a league, means that they can start off carefully and then adjust the buffs afterwards without hurting the metric of that. I'm not sure if that's the argument or the reason for it being the way it is.
I think it is,
but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it feels like, okay, there's definitely like multiple entities at GG who are balancing PoE 1 at least, right? Because we can very clearly see, I think, that there are different ideas that are kind of conflicting with each other that are being implemented into the game, right? On one hand, you get things that are like crazy power creep, or like really fun stuff, or just really well designed stuff, right? And on the other hand, you have like things that are really just not there. So one example I would give is the Elementalist rework. I don't know if you remember how Elementalist looked like before. It was full of like pendulum mechanics and random conflux and stuff like that. And so that rework was amazing, right? Like that was like one of the best reworks ever. Now the Ascendancy has an identity, right? You do deal elemental shit. You deal with ailments. You can specialize in ailments. You can specialize in elemental damage, and you're good at doing like AoE damage plus golems, right?
Yeah.
So that's the rework. But then on the other hand, they do other reworks, like for example, Trickster, who now has a pendulum defensive mechanic, right? And they're like, so on one hand, they're like, okay, pendulums are bad. Let's rework them. Oh, works amazingly. On the other hand, okay, let's rework this ascendancy because people are not playing it enough. And it's the same thing with things like, for example, Chieftain, right? I think Chieftain was a very, very well designed ascendancy before the rework. It was actually one of the best ascendancies in terms of like just design itself.
But wasn't it severely underplayed?
Yes, because the skills that it would synergize with are weak, right? That's the problem. They should buff the skills that it uses rather than buff the ascendancy itself. Because a perfect skill for it was Tectonic Slam, right? Tectonic Slam benefited from so many. If you had like every single node you pick was like 25% more multiplier on that ascendancy for that skill, and it was still shit. It wouldn't do damage, right? So the skill was clearly just underpowered, not the ascendancy, right? The ascendancy worked very, very well, had really, really cool synergies. It's just that the skills were not there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that kind of take as well, for sure. It's it always comes down to this whole topic of how to put it, the idea that they are okay with having severely underperforming abilities is one take, and the other take is the meta shakeups, right? So they're okay with having classes or abilities, but even ascendancies being severely underperforming, like they're okay with that. So that's one aspect of it. I think that balancing everything to be perfect is going to be impossible, but it's also something that they've said they are happy with not having everything perfectly balanced, as it
Yeah.
allows them to shake up metas. A prime example of that is actually the longevity of things like the every second league being heavily meta shaken. I can't even speak anymore. And you know, if you look at this current league, the meta of certain builds is the same we had last league. There's been some newer builds
Yep.
emerging thanks to the league mechanic, as well as some variation with tattoos. There's also been the addition of the Guardian changes, which actually has allowed minion builds to have a higher build diversity than we've ever seen since the start of the game, which is crazy. Yet they're not meta, but there's a lot of different mini builds you can play, which is cool. But the problem with it is that people have played it, and people wanted not to have their meta builds nerfed. But if you look at the retention, people are bored. They play the same thing. They've done it.
Yeah.
Having a meta
Yeah.
shakeup is required. I mean, we're what, 1.5 months
Yes.
into the league right now, and
Yeah.
I'm at the point where like I'm doing challenges already a month into the league. That's something I do on the third month. I'm doing it after 1 month, and I'm doing some really stupid crafts right now, which is very fun. But it's not like I'm super excited to play that new thing or let's check out this or that. I'm like, I just do this and I'll have fun. And you know, in a couple of weeks, then in 9 days, whatever it is, I'll be playing Diablo 4 Season 2. Like,
Yeah, definitely meta
it's just
shakeup
odd.
is needed. One of the things I am like very disappointed at from the PoE 2 presentation is the direction that they're taking. That I feel like a lot of developers randomly are taking this direction now of limiting player options and kind of like pigeonholing them into specific choices. So the example would be here for PoE 2, how they're making it so that wands can only be used with spells. You cannot use wands with attacks anymore in PoE 2, right? That's like a limitation that and people are okay. What about KB? Well, KB is now a spell, right? And so you cannot have two different things that you do with the same thing, right? It's very limiting. And that reminds me of the thing they did where they were trying to nerf bows to make it so that people don't use bows for spellcasters, right?
No.
But like, why? Right? If bows are so strong, okay, well, nerf the modifiers, but don't like remove that, right? Because they just completely removed modifiers from quivers. They just reworded them to only apply to attacks and things like that. I think like that stifles creativity, and that actually lowers the amount of options that people have, which lowers the amount of builds that people are going to discover and create, which makes the meta more stale and boring, right? I personally also didn't like that change with the quivers because I was actually planning, I was planning to make an arc build, and I had like a genius plan because arc scales of number of chains. So I had like a crazy craft, and I knew that with harvest I can somehow craft that like an influence bow with a bunch of chains, and then have a quiver with a bunch of chains, and have like a single target actual like arc build. And then they removed harvest and nerfed the quiver thing in one league, and so my plan was gone.
That's
But
fair, but I mean, something that I'm very happy with. Originally, PoE 2 was supposed to be another aspect of a campaign for PoE 1, and they would combine and become one game at the end game. I'm actually happy from a content creator perspective. I'm very biased, but as a player, I'm actually happy that they did that decision because this allows them to now create a similar type of gameplay combat experience that we both have said that I actually enjoy from Diablo 4, for example, because the things that Diablo 4 does is completely horrific. It's terrible. But the things they do well, they do really well. And PoE 2 is taking those perks before we even saw it, and those are the goals for PoE 2, which is creating this more of a new player-friendly approach. Even crafting is made easier. You're not reforging or re-rolling your entire item. The idea with an item that you pick up is you see the modifiers, and what you can do is add a modifier to it. That's like the core essence of the PoE 2 gameplay, which allows it to be more and more friendly for the new and newer players so that the game itself can grow. If people like PoE 2, they'd also be more inclined to try out PoE 1, for example. So that's one aspect of it. And just seeing the actual game itself grow because of it caters better to those players without making it detrimental, without taking away the enjoyment of aspirational endgame content. And that's something PoE 1, which we already covered a couple of times already, when it comes to like crafting. PoE 1 is extremely hard to get into for new and newer players, and that's obviously a big problem. Whereas PoE 2 seems to, at least from the pre-beta things that we've seen so far, been able to see that this is something they're actually looking to fix. Have you played any PoE 2? Like, I know there were Gamescom as well. Like, have you had the chance?
No.
What was
No,
your
no.
take on the gameplay you've seen, though?
The gameplay I've seen it looks pretty cool. I like the direction. Actually, whenever they announced, remember when they were announcing like Act 2 of PoE 2? That was like a while ago, like a couple of years ago or whatever. And whenever they announced that, people were talking about whether PoE 2 will actually look like this, right? People were wondering, like, is this just like early campaign and the character is slow and weak and that's why it looks like that? Or is it actually the direction they're going? So I made a video, okay? And this is, okay, you can now people are going to be able to potentially blame me for the 315 nerfs and for Arch Nemesis in one go, okay? So here's what I did. I made a video about, will PoE 2 actually look like this? And so I made a video explaining what does GGG actually have to do to make Path of Exile get to the point where they can have this type of a gameplay, right? So I personally really enjoy that stuff. I really enjoy like, you like this type of like MMO gameplay where you apply some kind of a debuff and then you hit the enemy with other abilities, so it's harder and you do like some combos or stuff like that, right? I like that. I also enjoy the just hold one button down and mow mobs in PoE as well, right? I like both. Yeah. But so I told them that, told them, I don't know if they even seen it, right? So who knows? But there are two things that I brought up. One was monster identity, and it had to do with the fact that in PoE 1, monsters were basically just like white mob, blue mob, yellow mob, and the mob is either melee or ranged. Nothing else matters, right? It doesn't matter what the mob does. They don't have like, I'm fighting this, maybe other than porcupines. I'm fighting this type of mob. I have to do this type of thing, okay? This is a guy who has a lot of armor, so I have to use this ability, or there's nothing like that, right?
Yeah.
So that half a year later, Arch Nemesis appeared, right? They kind of tried to make mob type matter, right? So this is a monster who has this thing, you cannot stand close to it, right? Because it has this area around it that drains you or whatever, right? And things like that. And then another thing I talked about was squishing the multipliers, right? And again, like half a year later, 315, and they kind of did that. And what a lot of people are missing is that was such a needed patch. Maybe not the flask and mana changes at that time, but the nerf to multipliers, and what a lot of people don't remember, they actually buffed base damages of almost every single skill in the game by like, and almost every single weapon by like almost double. So they buffed base damages and nerfed multipliers in order to kind of narrow the difference between the weakest builds and the strongest builds. Because currently in PoE, the biggest issue with balancing the game is the fact that the numbers are too large, and that comes from multipliers being too large. And that comes down from, it's both for players and for monsters, right? So if you look at players, you can have a guy who has an endgame build who is doing 500,000 damage, and then you have another guy who is doing 500 million damage, right? That's kind of an insane disparity to have between builds, even if one is like very poorly made and one is super min-maxed, right? It's really, really crazy number-wise to be able to even possibly balance the game in any way. And the other thing is the monsters. The fact that the monster numbers are so large, and what I mean by that is a monster gets 100% extra fire, physical as fire. A monster gets like 500% crit multi, 2 extra projectiles, which they're shooting in a barrage, so that's a ×3 multiplier, right? So that suddenly you can have the same monster in the same tier of a map, in the same amount of juice, like you're just alking both maps. You can have the same conditions seemingly to a player. You think it's the same thing, but one monster does 20 times the damage of another, right? So that's very, very difficult to balance.
Absolutely. I mean, we've always had this issue where generic damage increase and generic HP increase to fix balance problems was obviously a problem in general when you're in a position where every new release of content in an ARPG world is supposed to give the player more speed, more power. You're supposed to feel stronger. If all ARPG, most actually, starts out rather slow, right? And as the time progresses,
Yeah.
it's going to go faster and faster and faster and faster. And PoE hit that a long time ago, and their decision was, hey, we got to fucking stop this and bring it back. And they've done some really bad choices, 315. They've done some really good choices, 316, and, many other leagues as well. Something that they've done really well is, like, if you go back and look at how PoE was played a handful of years ago, the main focus that people had was to create a glass cannon build, because the best layer of defense was kill them before they touch you. If you do that, you can do anything in the game, any sort of aspirational endgame content. One of the things they did when they reworked how aspirational content functioned was, it was such a smart decision with the way they spread out loot to not just be exclusive for certain areas like delirium stuff and whatnot. You can drop that outside as well, as an example. What they did for Simulacrum, for example, was instead of capping at 20, suddenly you have between 20 and 30. Now, getting up to 20 waves, you don't really need that big of a gear. Going from 20 to 30 is, in most cases, there are some exceptions, obviously. That's the beauty of PoE, there's always exceptions. The waves between 20 and 30, you are forced to have at least a certain level of degree of defensive layers. So suddenly, you've taken these high-end glass cannon builds that did everything. I mean, I remember one of my biggest Spectre builds I played did 700 million Shaper DPS alone. It did 2.4 billion Shaper DPS with an aura bot. And I was running maps and endgame bosses with it. It was perfect. And we compared that. I went to Crouching Tuna, who focuses on delve content, and compared my performance of that character with a build that has 0 HP. It's just there to do damage. And his build was doing about 4 billion DPS, but his build would never be able to do even a white tier map without risking to die, compared to what my character was handling. But taking that character that I was then considering one of the best ways to play the game at the time, and fast forward to having a build that it was designed that way with 700 million damage, I would not be able to do the aspirational end game content in the current state of the game, because of the fact that you are now forced to have a more of a balanced approach to the game. And that obviously makes it so that we have a much more interesting approach to the builds, because now defenses are very, very important to keep in mind to handle certain levels of content. Obviously, you have the exceptions, like a miner build, a trapper build, whatever, to do endgame bosses. You circle them down in half a second. That still exists. But those builds you don't do wave 30 simu with. You don't do those builds for juice tier 16s without that kind of approach. So not talking about Headhunter and Meixsell's approaches, because those are, again, exceptions, right? Because like the Headhunter Magic Find that I like to play is like, you just need enough gear to make sure that you handle the first 2 rares. Once you've done that, it's just going to take care of itself. You can do anything after that, right? That's kind of like most Headhunter approaches works, at least with Magic Finding. And Meixsell is like, you can choose defense, res, or offense, or a mix of them, and they just take care of itself, right? So taking those things aside, your character is now in a position where the game itself is encouraging you to have a well-designed character, rather than, hey, I'm just going to be a glass cannon, it's going to be fine. I like that approach, but also when we're talking about these things, and especially when we talk about like aspirational endgame content and what's required and this and this and this, we are also only talking about things that a very small fraction of the entire player base is actually engaging with. And that's something that's very hard to separate.
Yeah, I think something you mentioned before, speaking of like, we're like the small fraction of the player base, and we interact with all this high-end stuff. But earlier you were bringing up the, especially like crafting and how hard it is for new players to get into it, right? And I think there's a concept in game design about teaching the player how to play the game, right? And that exists in all games. Basically, you see a character in game and the character does something and you're like, oh, wait, can I do that? And then you follow and then you do the same thing and you learn what you're supposed to do, right? And I think PoE kind of lacks that. And it would be nice if the PoE2 campaign had some of the solutions for that, right? Like, for example, let's say you need to teach a player how to craft boots, right? You can have an NPC, instead of like a random side quest that does nothing for the player, you can have the side quest actually teach something to the player, kind of like Nico, right? You have the Nico quests where he tells you, hey, grab the dynamite, destroy the wall, and he tells you, and now you learn, right? If you didn't have that quest, players wouldn't even know that they can destroy any walls, right? But so you can have a NPC and he tells you, okay, I need a pair of boots, I need a magical pair of boots, and he takes you somewhere, you find the boots, you find the transmute or whatever, and he tells you to use it on it, right? You use it, and then he tells you, oh, you can actually keep it, I was just trolling. And so you can have a quest like that where it can be some different mechanic, right? It doesn't have to be transmuting and white item. I think that players can figure that out, but you can have some kind of an interactive event in a game where the player can actually learn the mechanic better, right? Rather than just have it in the game and the player just has to read the wiki or watch a guide or something like that, right? So I think the game could do a much better job of like teaching players how to actually play it.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I usually call Diablo 4 to be like the most casual part on when it comes to these things on the side of the spectrum, and PoE is on the other side of the spectrum. At the same time, we have games in the middle like Grim Dawn or Last Epoch, and I think Last Epoch does it very well. But you also have to keep in mind that if you compare the approach that Last Epoch has compared to PoE, now based on what we talked about before this podcast started, I'm assuming you haven't engaged with the new version of the crafting project in Last Epoch, but it's very similar to what you have seen. So what they've done is that Last Epoch is designed in a way where you are expected to use the crafting mechanic and system in the game to progress your character and the campaign. You're actually having a quest in the campaign that teaches you the crafting process because you are expected to utilize it. Whereas in PoE, you are not expected to engage with crafting mechanics for two reasons. One, the benchcraft, but you are getting told about the benchcraft with the benchcraft recipes that you pick up. Maybe it could be better, sure, but that's the extent of it. When it comes to crafting in PoE, we're talking about mechanics that have been introduced later, such as essences, fossils, yada yada. All of these things are actual just league mechanics that has been as expansion packages of contents been added onto the core game. Whereas, again, compared to something like Last Epoch, the approach of Last Epoch is that the crafting approach there, they can be some new things added later, but because of the fact that you are expected to engage with this mechanic to make sure that you can handle the campaign and go into the endgame system, is then forced to be telling you how to engage with it. What does this do? What can you do with this? So they have a quest that covers that. It's a side quest, but it's there. And you don't have that in PoE. But even if they did, the only thing they really could do would be just show you the benchcraft. Hey, look at this. And I mean, that's not going to change much, right?
Yeah, let's say you have like an NPC who goes with you to something like a Merveil, right? And you're like approaching the Cavern of Wrath or whatever, and he tells you, we're not prepared for this, right? She's gonna do a shit ton of cold damage. Have this ring, have a transmute, go to the bench and craft it, right? And then you make a cold res ring, and then you go fight it, and you're like, oh wait, that's actually nice. And so you could have things like that, right? Like, of course, you can dress it up in the lore and stuff to make it palatable and make it fit the story. But yeah, stuff like that, definitely. Like there needs to be like some more focus on crafting for new players so that they can like fix up their gear and it actually makes sense for them, so they can have like a nice progression and the game like teaches them. And definitely the game needs something more than just like essences for early crafting. Even essences, like even the point where you get to essences in early maps, if your build sucks, you're gonna struggle, right? Like once you get into yellows and you have to alch your maps, the player feels like, oh yeah, I have to alch my maps to get the bonus, right? So they start alching the maps, so they start getting like difficult modifiers on their maps, and they start fighting essences because they need the gear, right? So they need to craft it. Essences are like the easiest thing that they can do, and they have to fight difficult shit that they don't have the gear for, right? For them. So it definitely needs some kind of like white map, or even before white maps, like second half of the campaign, like an entry level, like a limited crafting mechanic for players to be able to just like fix up their own gear a little bit, right? Because if you're an advanced player, you can do that. That's not a problem, right? But whether you play SSF or trade, you can figure that out for yourself, right? You can do, for example, rogue, you can do other things. But a new player really struggles when they get to map, I think. They don't have suppression, they don't have their resists figured out, they have no chaos res, they have no physical mitigation, and they're just getting mauled by like every mob that has some modifier that they cannot handle.
Yeah. I think that like in a perfect world, we would see certain changes, but there's a couple things to keep in mind. Path of Exile is a free-to-play game. They make their money not from selling the game, but from making sure that they sell supporter packs and whatnot, and mystery boxes, all that jazz, right?
Yep.
So that obviously means that every time they introduce a change to the game, it needs to be incentivized with, is this going to be something that's going to make us more money? Because if it's not, a quality of life feature might be just a wasted investment. So that said, I mean, there was a lot of feedback and criticism regarding them not having a tutorial in-game. And what did they do? They added a scuffed version of like an in-game kind of wiki approach where you could read up on all the things where most people wouldn't engage with it. In my opinion, what you talked about, seemed to be a really good approach to my end. I think that having the option that when you start your first character of a league, you get a prompt in the start where you say skip tutorial. There could be like a little box that shows up and say, hey, you can enable or disable the tutorial, and then say in the tutorial, you're going to be given certain base items and whatnot to navigate in a better way. And to make sure that that's not something that's going to be better for the veteran players, they would just make sure that if you do the tutorial, that's actually going to cost you time. So as an
exactly.
example,
It costs you time, but it pays you something for your time, so you don't feel like you're wasting your time as a new player. You get something for it, so it makes you happy as well.
Exactly. I like that approach. So it's like, as an example of you going forward, you can have this little beacon that's following you or whatever. Several games have like a little guide tutorial unit that's following you around for lore reasons, and it's gonna tell you, oh, look at this. It's gonna be like a text bubble or whatever. Let's say you enter the caverns of hatred or whatever, anger. You're on your way to Merville, and this little thing or whatever is gonna pop up, and it's like gonna pause the game or pause the area and be like, hey, this is where you're heading, and she does a lot of cold damage, and maybe a little image of showing her doing the abilities and whatnot. It's very, it's recommended to make sure that you check your cold resistance. You can check that in your character panel, and having that gone through, and then the NPC or whatever the fuck, as an example, like you said, he's gonna be like, to cover this, you can purchase a cold ring from your event Nesta in Act 1, or to make it easier, here's a free cold, like a sapphire ring or whatever it's called for you. And what you can do with this is you can use different type of crafting methods. A simple example of that would be here's a transmute orb. You can use that to make it blue, or you can go to the benchcraft and whatnot. But making sure that investment of that tutorial is going to be a time investment where you can't just skip it, because if you've opted in to play the tutorial, you have to go through this, and the trade-off is that you're given that access to that item as you progress, so that people can learn in a better way. But I mean, that's a lot of work and a lot of investments in terms from GGG to do something like that.
That would help. That would help with the drop-offs, right? Like they could specifically target drop-offs of players. Like they have statistics, right? When players quit the game, right? So like before the player quits the game, they can give them something. Hey, here's this thing, and now we can do this thing, right? Give them something to like motivate them, to hook them or whatever, right? So they could use that for that, right? Could be like a little rat NPC. It hops in your pocket and talks to you whenever there is a relevant thing and tells you to do something and stuff.
I think that would be great. I think that the biggest flaw of GGG when it comes to Path of Exile is the fact that they are really, really bad at weaving in and keeping new players. People are new, like it's just returning players. And like for me, who's been crafting items to mirror items most leagues for 9+ years, and the reason for that is that when I started playing, we had transmute augs, alterations, alch, scours, and exalted orbs and divine orbs. That was like the currency we had access to. Crafting, that was a shit show. I made a mirror amulet back in the day. Cost me over 500,000 alterations, because that's how you craft it. It was fucking terrible. Then there were eternal orbs, which are legacy now. And then it's like a new league comes in and like, hey, look at this. We are now given bench crafts. What the fuck? We were introduced to benchcraft. This was before ascendancies in the lab even existed. And then we got the next thing and be like, hey, here's essences, or here's fossils, and here's beasts and all that. Suddenly we were introduced with to a large degree, in some of these are rather advanced crafting methods, like Delve with fossils and stuff like that can be somewhat advanced. But we were given that chunk of knowledge onto players that were already experienced and well-versed in the low quantity of different crafting methods that we had access to. And we just added that on top. And suddenly our knowledge of crafting became bigger. The next league came around, hey, here's essences, or here's this, or here's that. So we got a little bit here and there. The current state of the game, you don't have like a super small, tennis ball of knowledge that, you add a little bit to it every now and then. you have like this colossal planet of information that you're
Yeah,
going to devour and consume all at once. And that's the problem, that there is no help for new and newer players to navigate through this jungle of mechanics and convoluted, advanced complex approaches to even grasp the understanding of it. And
You know
that's
what
why
could be
crafting
used
is
for
so
that?
daunting. Sorry?
Yeah, you know what could be used for that? Actually, memories. You could have like lower level memories that are related to a specific league. You know how you have like essence memory or stuff like that. If the game could know, right? If this is your first league, for example, if this is your first league, if this is like your first time interacting with a certain memory, the memory could have that kind of a tutorial for this league mechanic there, right?
Possibly. No, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, they have this wiki in-game texting. I don't know how many of the new players are actually reading through those things. And then you have the other problem, right? The skill tree is already very advanced. It's a super big tree that's scary for a lot of new players. I understand that.
Yeah.
But then again, you make one mistake, you only have X amount of regret respec points from the skill from the quests to work with. It's not a detrimental part for the player base if they were to say give you a free respec that you can use unlimited amount of times up to a certain level. That would be fine.
Yeah.
Sure, the result of that would obviously be that the race scene, which wouldn't even bother using them for the most part, but it potentially could lead to that. The race scene is in a position where obviously every veteran player would play super giga race speeding tree up to that level, and then they would respec. And that's okay,
Yeah.
because the result of it is that it would be a big improvement to new and newer players to weave in more players to the game and actually grow the company and grow the game. I just don't understand why they're so hell-bent on the vision of not giving features that would actually help grow the new and newer players to weave more people in. It feels like they're putting all their eggs in the basket of saying, hey, PoE 2 is going to do that because of the things that Chris Wilson has said, for example, where they said that people haven't played PoE in many years because last time they played, it was buggy, glitchy, they had desyncing issues, which is fixed many years ago. But they don't want to play it because that was their experience. So when they say, hey, here's PoE 2, then they might be interested in trying it out. So, I mean, marketing-wise, it makes sense. But that doesn't mean that they can't make it so that the current game is also building and attracting new and newer players. It's just, why?
It feels like they've abandoned the development of progression of PoE 1 at some point, or like they think they cannot do something, like they're putting just so much effort in PoE 2. Like, you're right. And also I agree with the thing that you said about the respec and stuff. Definitely agree that could be a good thing for the newer players. And the racers already are respecing, like for example on Kitava, they're really respecing points to do more single target DPS and stuff like that. But yeah, I agree for sure.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, another game that is doing it the opposite, which is completely catering to the new player experience, is Diablo 4, for example. So we have patch notes coming in 2 days from now, I believe. Dev stream on the 10th.
Nice. It's gonna be nice to see the vampiric powers.
Yeah,
That's
no,
gonna be
we've seen in the notes they had like a rough draft of it, to my understanding, with some of the powers, at least. But I mean, the changes they made on in D4 that we've seen, obviously it's only theoretical, but obviously D4 has been a very bad game according to most people, for obvious reasons. But the things that was stated in the dev stream is, in my opinion, like a big step in the right direction. Someone in chat told me a couple of days ago that sure, it might be a step in the right direction, but that's not enough when they've already taken 7,000 miles off on the wrong direction. So if they take a few steps in the right direction, now they're still on the very far off track, right? Now, from my personal perspective, when it comes to like the D4 as that's coming around the corner now, is that I'm carefully optimistic about it, because I really want it to be a good game for a variety of reasons. Like you and both you and I have mentioned earlier, like the things that they do well, they do really well, and that's why the combat's so enjoyable despite all of their issues. But with that said, like, what's your take on what we've heard on the D4 dev stream so far?
So from what I've seen, I really like the progression of content and like the bosses, right? The way they're implementing the bosses, as far as I understand, is that you engage in certain type of content, and that gives you access to a certain boss, right? And that gives you like an incentive to do different things. I really like that approach. I like the Hell Tides. I like that there's like lots of different well, there's actually not lots of different things to do, but they're trying to do it so that you can have multiple things to do, and that's a good thing. So I like that. From what I've seen, I like the, for example, the Lilith fight. If the Uber fights are anywhere like near to the Lilith fight, that's gonna be very fun, because the Lilith fight, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great fight. Short of like, other than the hitbox being a bit weird, and what else? Pretty much that's like my main issue. And all class imbalance. I think class imbalance is the worst thing of Lilith fight. Like, you do it on one class, and then you're like, why don't I just play Necro and just like be immune to all this shit half the time and one shot it? Like, but I did it on the Rogue. I was playing a ranged Rogue, and then I did also Twisting Blades Rogue, and but it was very, very fun. Like, learning the fight, it was super cool. Like, one of the best like ever RPG like boss fight experiences I've ever had. So if the other fights are like at least 50% as good, that's gonna be super cool, because it's gonna be a lot of other good fights. I have like a list of stuff that they're changing, right? So we got mounts, the mounts being more responsive. That's fine. I don't really actually mind the mounts. I have a different opinion, but it's just like my personal opinion from other people. I actually enjoyed going to the dungeons, because I enjoyed the fact that I like the world, right? I think the world is very immersive. The world is very cool. The environments are beautiful, and I like just jumping out somewhere in the desert. I ride through the desert, and then I kill some mobs on the way. And before they changed the level scaling, it was actually just the same as doing the mobs in the dungeon. So it was just like extra mobs that you're doing on the way. It feels more immersive. You get the same amount of experience and loot on the way, so it didn't really bother me. But the teleporting is just fine, I guess. They make it so that you teleport directly into the dungeons now, right? I think.
Yes. I mean, the way I see it is like tons upon tons of the issues that are being resolved are things that should have been in the game in the first place. Like you said before, search bar and the stash tab, for example. I think there's so many things. It's like I made a little bar when I went through the reaction of the dev stream, where like a win or lose somewhere on the bar they went. And in the start, it was just a snore fest. It was all the way down. It was so bad. I almost fell asleep watching it. And then they started adding some good things, but I refused to move the bar whenever they said, "Oh, we're gonna do this." Like, horse goes through barricades. I'm like, that should have been from the start. The fact that the horse cooldown is so massive, that should have been from the start that it was lower. The fact that you're teleporting into Nightmare Dungeon, that should have been from the start. Search bar should have been from the start. And I refuse to give them a win and a praise or credit for adjusting or making things changed that should have been there from the very start. Because to my experience, it's like, if they had played the game or play tested this properly, that would have been something they would have been on a to-do list to fix before the game launched. It wasn't. And this is like one of the biggest problem with games that are in a state of live service games. It doesn't feel like a live service. It feels like more like live updating it. There's a coding expression of this called SaaS, I think it is. It's software as a service, which allows users to connect to and use cloud-based apps over the internet. Common examples are email, scanning, office tools, and whatnot. So basically what this is that it provides a complete software solution that you purchase on a pay-as-you-go basis from a cloud service provider. That's what the SaaS actually refers to. The problem is that they give us a tool, like a bare-bone skeleton. Like, here, play this, and then we pay full price for this as if it was a finished product. And then instead of having the investment of, people in the company making the tests and changes and whatnot and seeing, oh, this is good, we should do that. Instead of investing that money, they're just selling this half-assed product, having the players play test it, provide feedback, and then they're just making half-assed changes based on that feedback to then build this skeleton into an actual, fleshed-out creature or entity in this case. And it's just very sad. That's why we've always said that we're looking at Diablo 4 at a perspective of waiting for it to be patched up to the point where now it's a good game, because Diablo 4 will remain a bad game till they fix these things. The current updates, from my perspective, is a step in that direction. And to combine that with the addition of PoE, for example, there a lot of people saying that Diablo 4 that it was like a more of a marketing ploy for PoE, and it's funny that is to say, it felt like it for sure, but people seem to miss
for PoE.
Oh, for sure. But people also need to remember that in reality, the worse Diablo 4 performs, the less PoE grows from it. And people don't seem to grasp that. Most people, they're like looking at it like, oh, if that game is bad, people will play PoE. But the one thing Blizzard does the best in the gaming industry is not promote a good game. It's not giving us a high quality game to enjoy. They do two things really well. They shove nostalgia down our throats till we're throwing up. That's why they're selling reworks of Classic, reworks of Warcraft 3, yada yada. And the other thing is marketing. There's a reason there were so many people that's never played an ARPG that played Diablo 4. And that's people.
Their marketing was insane. Like it was very successful.
Like two things to that. It's like one is people that never play the genre didn't even understand why is there seasonal content? Why do I have to re-level a new character every season? And the other part of it is that you have people that have now taken the decision to spend money to invest their way into the genre. And then as they are playing it, the longer they play the game, the higher the probability of those people being told, hey, PoE is a better game, you should try PoE. And then they say, what the fuck is PoE? And then they're going to be told, it's a free-to-play ARPG game. So if they're having fun in D4, the longer they play, the higher the probability of them being told that. And if the PoE is a free-to-play game and they're being told it's better, there is no reason for that player not to try PoE. So the better Diablo 4 performs, the better PoE grows.
Yeah. I think one thing, when you mentioned the breaking of the barricades on the horse, that should have been there from the start, that actually, how I said that I have a plan to that you can implement and double the PoE player base in a year, just this grand claim that I'm making. Okay, one of the parts of that is the greatest change to PoE that you could have made already, okay? And this is what's your favorite movement skill, by the way?
In PoE? Shield charge.
Okay, of course. Same, right? So imagine if shield charge would break doors. Imagine that. You're just smashing through the door, right? First of all, the skill usage would go up. I don't know if you're familiar with StarCraft.
I am.
Okay, so there are Hellions, right? Terran has Hellions. There I sometimes tell this to people to explain how non-balanced change can affect the meta, right? So in Wings of Liberty in StarCraft 2, Hellions had an upgrade where it was called Blue Hellion, right? And it made the Hellions do more damage with their flame. And Blizzard decided one day, okay, we're gonna make the flame actually blue. When you upgrade the thing, it's gonna do the same damage as it was before with the buff, but now the flame is gonna look different. It's gonna be blue, right? No balance change at all. Just made it blue. Next tournament, okay, there was like an MLG something. The whole tournament was dominated by Terrans using Hellions. Before that, Hellions are shit. Maybe you build one or two against Zerglings, but like nobody was playing with them. After they made it blue, fucking the whole Slayers team with like Boxer, MMA, and another player and MVP, they just destroyed everybody with Blue Flame Hellions. So the same thing here, like in PoE, if you have like a cosmetic change or something like that, the skill usage goes up, right? Like one of the things that you were saying is that PoE needs a meta shakeup, right? So that comes from basically content updates, right? And the content updates in PoE have I think they are one of the things that they are underselling, I think, is the new uniques. Don't you think like they're like underselling the new uniques because they're not showcasing them early enough? They're doing like teasers, they're doing like one at a time, but I feel like the uniques are a bigger deal than people think. Like for example, the amulet now, there is an amulet that makes people like almost immortal. It's like an insane amulet that everybody in hardcore uses. I forget what it's called, and it's so powerful. But before the league, nobody really talks about it, right? Like you have so many like crazy things that are added to the game, but the major changes actually don't come from the class balance or skill balance anymore. Like skill balance, they don't do that anymore really, but actually from the uniques, right? The uniques that are being implemented to the game, some of them are really, really crazy.
No, I
feel like they're
definitely
like,
agree to that. I mean, I feel like in the world of ARPGs, I feel like the announcement and the hype up and the way GGG is presenting their expansions and whatnot is top of the line. I mean, you can always nitpick and say, oh, they should do this, or they should do that, they can do that better. I think that nothing will ever be perfect. But comparing what they have compared to, say, Diablo 4 being a recent, you know, when they
I
say,
don't understand it. Yeah.
yeah, like when they say, hey, look at this new power you can get. What do? They show you this is the power they can do. They do that on the stream, not just in text afterwards in a post, in a news post. They do it on the stream. Like, look at this. This is tattoos you can get. Oh, wow. People are like, oh my God, plus level of skills. Holy shit. You know, people like explode about it. Oh, here's a new boss. Like they go through the lore a little bit. They don't repeat themselves. They mention it once. And then be like, hey, look at this. And then the video is showing that happening or showing that person emerging. No spoilers, but enough to make you feel, you know, a little interested. Be like, oh, look at that. That teaser was so good. And then, you know, compare that to what D4 did. They showcased 2 new monster types and they just show the model spinning around. Then they talked about how insanely cool their abilities are. They like, oh, super big AoE effect. And I'm just looking at this model spinning around whilst they're so excited talking about how cool their abilities are. We never saw the abilities. We just sat there looking at this model. I'm like, that doesn't hype me up. They talked.
It's show not tell.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the concept of show not tell?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And then the other part of it was the fact that unlike GGG, the structure of what they did was that first they had this trailer video showing that covered all of the lore. And then all of a sudden, you had the possibility of them talking about the hype up and teasers. And the first thing they did, oh, so you remember the video you just watched literally 30 seconds ago? We're just going to repeat everything that showed and talk about it. So that's like the first half hour of the podcast. I'm like, bro, we've just seen this. Like, move on.
And also that's the thing that people care about the least, mostly. Like, because the people who are playing the game who are the most casual don't watch these streams usually as well.
Yeah. I'm curious though, as when it comes to you as a content creator, I actually don't know how long you've been at it, if you don't mind me asking.
I've been making a bunch of stuff before doing stuff with PoE. I've been making some Hearthstone content. Let me see, where did I start my channel? So I started my channel like 10 years ago, but I did a bunch of random stuff. There's like random League of Legends stuff, Hearthstone stuff. I popped up with a lot of Hearthstone content. And then I came back to PoE. I've been playing it like on and off since the open beta, but I had like long breaks where I skipped a lot of leagues. And then I think like 4 years, like 4 years ago.
Oh, that's fair enough.
I came like fully back to PoE.
Okay. So, I mean, you make, I know for a fact you do a lot of beginner-friendly guides, like a ton of casual farming strats and league starter builds. And is this exclusively on YouTube, or do you do like PoE forum guides and whatnot as well?
Sometimes I do written guides as well. I have a few different things that I wrote. Like I wrote like a very extensive guide to the defenses, for example, that I posted on Reddit and stuff like that. I've been actually talking to the people from the PoE Vault to also.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah,
that's good.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had go ahead. Sorry.
So you might find some of my guides there as well.
All right.
In a written version.
All right. Well, welcome to the fold, then, I guess, if that happens. We have quite a few streamers on PoE Vault these days. I know one of the recent ones, like Pox, Belina, and a bunch of other streamers as well, is in there. It's actually pretty fun. Because I had, like, when I started, I just made written guides. I thought it was fun to share my experience and the fun I had with other people and helping them out with minions, because, you know, no one actually did it back then either. So I moved all my guides over to PoE Vault as well. It's been very fun creating the type of content and making them all collected under one roof, instead of, because PoE forums is a shit show to find certain guys on. You have to bump the thread.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I basically what I do is, okay, so what I enjoy doing, there's multiple different aspects of it, right? I enjoy like competitive games, right? The competitive aspect of it. So there's part of that in PoE. Of course, it's like a single player game, but of course it's nice to, make the most currency, kill the bosses. But in PoE, I like PoE because it's such a rich game. There's never like stuff that you run out of doing. Right? There's always new things you can try. There's always new builds. Like the only reason, there's just endless stuff to do, right? Like there's endless builds that you can do, endless builds that you can create, and it's the game is so flexible as well in what it allows you to do that I really like this, right? So I really enjoy that. I also like making and maintaining like a set of loot filters for people. I actually really enjoy like playing with my own specific loot filters. I have like a little bit of like background in design and stuff, so I always like make them look nice, make cool sounds, make it like really, really fine-tuned to the content or the leveling, right? So whenever I make like leveling guides, I usually have also like a filter that I'm using myself for this, because basically I want to, have the best bases. I want to have the best, the currency that is important for the build, the sockets that are important for the build, and so on. I find that it really helps a lot. So if anybody wants to speed up their leveling, like go to Filter Blade, make yourself a good leveling filter, and it will speed you up. Like it's one of the things that helps significantly. Yeah,
That's
and
fair.
also do some coaching. I used to do a lot of coaching for Hearthstone. I did some coaching in the past also for StarCraft. But yeah, I did a bunch of coaching for Hearthstone. Occasionally, I do also some coaching for PoE. People sometimes are interested in that as well. And whether it's just like they want to develop like a league start plan, and they have like a certain amount of time to play, and they have certain goals, right? Like someone wants to make a mirror, or someone wants to kill bosses in a certain time and stuff like that. Right? So I help people with that as well. But all of the time, the content is basically what I enjoy doing, like cool stuff I find out, and I just want to share that, right? I think that's where a lot of content creators basically come from. They play the game, they find it super cool, and they want to share it, right? Like oh, this is this cool thing, guys. You want to know how to do this? Here's how to do this, right? Here's how to play this build. Here's how to do this strategy. So now my content primarily focuses on builds, currency making strategies for PoE. For PoE, it's a little bit broad. I'm gonna be also making some content for Diablo, but that's gonna be mostly, I think, focused on builds, like some optimized builds I'm gonna be playing.
Is it a specific class or just anything you feel like doing?
Basically anything I feel like doing. I've been playing Rogue in the preseason, and in season 1 I've been playing Necromancer. Mostly I play also like every other class, but those are the things that I was focusing mostly on. One of the most fun builds I actually played in the season 1 was a Bloodwave Necro. So I made a Bloodwave Necro build that was able to reset the Bloodwave. You had the Bloodwave for basically every other pack, right?
All right.
And so it was really, really fun to play. It was super tanky. I killed Butcher like 15 levels above me in a Nightmare dungeon very easily. I thought this build is going to be just like a meme, but it actually turned out pretty strong.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, that's one of the good things when you have games that allows you to play a variety of things and still achieve those end game goals. Like, sure, we can complain and bitch and moan Diablo's Force lack of end game and replayability for aspirational content, but you can play most things and you can kill pretty much anything. The only one that you might have to, either get proper gear or have a specific build to handle would be the Uber Lilith fight. And I think that's okay to do.
Or
I mean,
Ben.
Yeah, there's that as well, obviously. But I mean, he doesn't count since he's not human. So I mean, but look at the approach of the content that we're getting from D4. Like the only huge, Uber boss fight that we have is like Duriel, King of Maggots. First off, I thought Duriel was a chick. I thought she was a female creature. So when they said King of Maggots, I had no freaking clue. Because the thing is, when I play ARPG games, back in the day when Diablo 1 and 2 was played, there was blasting music in my ears, in-game music was off, and lore, I don't give a shit. I still don't know why we're killing piety 500 times in PoE. I don't care about lore.
Same. But that's one of the things that Diablo does like way better than PoE, right? Like I understand the story of Diablo. Who the fuck is Sin? Why is he? Why? Who is he?
Like most people, I think, don't really care that much about lore, but then you have the people that do. But Diablo has always been very big, and I think that when we started playing many years ago, Diablo 1 and 2, we didn't play them as an classic ARPG because the whole genre was so new. So when we played them as a story game. So we did listen to the lore. We did listen to the voice lines of the NPCs. You know, what can I do for you? And Griswold comes in and can sell you, you know, repair your gear in Tristram. You know, we remember those things because that's what we experienced. Now, all I know is that Griswold, not Griswold, what's his name in Act 2? Act 2 armor vendor. All I know is that for some reason he has a tendency of spitting at me, and it pisses me off every time. His name is Groost. I like that's like the thing that's what I know, but I don't know why he's bad at us. Like I don't really care. It's like for me, ARPGs is more about, you know, killing monsters and whatnot. So you have different types of way of playing the game. But you know, in D4 we have Duriel King, you know, the male Duriel King of Maggots, being in a position being like the high end game boss. And what they said was that the Duriel fight is supposed to be easier than Echo of Lilith for the simple reason that this fight is not a thing you can get engaged with over and over and over again until you fight it, because it's actually going to cost you in-game currency that you have to farm for two different mechanics, right, to engage with. So that makes sense. But like you mentioned when we talked about D4, was rather interesting. I'm in the same boat as well there, and I agree with you. The Diablo 4 doesn't have that much, let's say, diversity in terms of in-game activities. So normally you park your ass in Nightmare Dungeons till you're level 100 or till your glyphs are max level, and the only time you would go out of that is when Helltide pops up because you needed some materials for some of the upgrades. That was the end game.
Or you're target farming some unique, so you're like go for the
exactly,
or amulets or whatever the hell.
Yes, but like Tree of Whispers, waste of fucking time. World events, waste of fucking time.
That's good.
So
buffing that is great for the game, I think, so that it makes sense to do it.
Yeah, because now, like, even the Obobolos for the gambling, waste of time. And now, like you mentioned, now there are features similar to PoE. If you farm Conqueror maps, you're going to get access to Zeros. You farm Shaper maps, you're going to get access to Shaper. You do Elder maps, you get access to Elder. If you engage with those bosses, you get access to the Uber version stuff. Suddenly you are, like, not steered, but you have a player active decision to say, hey, I want to do that to purchase, to gain access to that. Or I farm that so that I can self-farm my access to that and that. And that allows you to cater your experience and your time invested in a way that you feel like you're actually achieving something. Whereas D4 was like, I'm going to sit my ass for the next 30 hours in Nightmare Dungeons, and then I'm going to be level 100, and I'm done. I'm going to, stop playing the game, and I'll go back to PoE or Last Epoch. But now you're like, okay, but I can actually engage with Tree of Whispers. And
you get something for it, right? That's the thing. Even like for farming Nightmare Dungeons, what was it? Like you get, what is the
glyph levels
thing? Yeah, you get glyph levels, but also Nightmare Dungeons, the Beast in the Eyes.
So there's another boss from there,
Yeah. So it's nice when you have when doing one content enables you to do other content as well, right? So it doesn't feel you're just doing this one thing. It also feels like, okay, I'm also progressing toward this other thing, right? And that makes it less boring, less repetitive, I guess.
And then the item level changes, I think, is also another thing that makes it more enjoyable.
I like that.
Because now you're incentivized to do even harder Nightmare Dungeons, not just for experience. You're actually incentivized to do even harder. I believe the Nightmare Dungeons is -3 or something. Do you want to be, well, before it was 3 levels, now it's title 10 levels above you for maximized experience gain, right? But there was always a cap. There was no point in doing any tiers above that level above your character because of the simple fact that you didn't get more experience, and the loot was the same. But now you're incentivized, like, if your character can handle 20, 30 levels higher, you should do that, because that gear is going to be by default, the baseline gear that drops is higher, which means you have a better chance of dropping upgrades. And that, again, is one of those things that is not just aspirational content, it's progression content, where you feel like you're rewarded for your time.
For ARPG. Yeah, it's like a fundamental rule, I think, for ARPG. One of the things that went wrong in when GDG removed the fractured map farming, right? And in the 315, Calandra League, I think the quantity changes just broke the game until they reverted them, because they broke the fundamental rule of the fact that when you're investing into the map, unless you're doing something like really blatantly stupid, if you're investing into the map, you should be getting more out of it, right? And when that relationship is broken, right, when doing harder content or where killing more monsters is not more rewarding, that's bad for the game, right? Because then it doesn't incentivize you to progress, right? What you need is like an incentive. Okay, I need to get stronger so that I can run this higher tier content or whatever, because the higher tier content gives better loot, right? And same thing with like bosses. So one of the things that GG got a little bit better over time, but there's still some flaws. Like for example, the eternal hunger boss or whatever that doesn't drop any loot for some reason. But they get a little bit better at boss drops, right? The Uber bosses have specific rewards, right? So there is a reason to do them. They might not necessarily, they might not necessarily be always profitable, but they have some unique rewards tied to them, right? And they're doing the same thing in Diablo, right? They're going to be giving you opportunity to target farm specific uniques, and also the Uber bosses have like a decently high, we'll see what it is, but supposedly higher chance to get the Uber uniques, right? But I'm definitely gonna make, from what I'm seeing right now, like as I'm thinking, I think I'm gonna make like a boss farmer, definitely. Like I'm gonna make a character that's gonna be definitely targeting the bosses to just try to get the Uber uniques and stuff.
I definitely agree with that. I'm in the same boat as well. Like I want to play around with new builds, update my guides. Like I'm not sure if you know, I'm responsible for all of the Necromancer build guides on Icy Veins for D4. So that's going to be one of my main focuses. And then obviously boss farming is going to be very enjoyable. See how it feels, of course. It might be boring. I don't know. We'll see. But that also brings me up to another topic, though. When we talk about ARPGs in general, we talk about Last Epoch, we talk about D4 and mainly PoE. So target farming or target acquiring things is something that I'm a big fan of, because it's like one of those things where I am incentivized to engage with a certain mechanic as I can drop those things. And in Diablo 4, it's based around the fact that you can't trade anything other than rare items. Like you can't trade unique or legendary items with other people. So I'm incentivized. So I'm incentivized to engage with that. Similar to how solo self-fun and PoE would be, where you are actually engaging with the mechanic because you can't trade them. You're going to have to farm them yourself. And in Trade League, because of a couple of factors, one obviously stack decks is ruining a lot of things with the divination cards. You can actually have full access to Uber Elder before anyone in the entire league has even gotten to white tier maps, and I think that's a really big problem. So that said, I mean, that out of the way, there are obviously target acquiring items or target farmable stuffs in PoE as well. The problem, though, is that the vast majority of players are playing Trade League, similar to Diablo, but you can trade everything in PoE, which means that you are more incentivized to just do something that generates the most currency, to then purchase whatever scraps is generated from other people engaging with the mechanic and or getting it from stacked decks or div cards, and then you get those things that way, which creates a rather odd way of farming. Because I really feel like the differences between these games is like when you look at Last Epoch, you have a direct way of farming. Certain bosses have a set loot drop table for certain items, and there's no divination cards. And if you want to farm something that doesn't have a guaranteed drop for a certain boss, different monoliths or different areas that you do these map systems, endgame system in, they have, for example, one area has the possibility of a map node saying, hey, you're going to get a random set or unique glove, and another area might have a unique or set pair of chess pieces, right? So if you're looking for a rare chess piece, you would do that area. But if you're looking for a specific unique glove, you would do that area. So it's not target farming, but it's narrowing down the RNG so that it is sort of target farming, but it gives you
a reason.
Reason to do that mechanic. You're not just farming endless. If you're experienced, there's a reason why you're doing this, and that incentivizing feature is worth so much for the sake of enjoyment. Like in Last Epoch right now, I'm probably going to stream it later today, actually. There is a specific relic that I'm looking for, which drops from a boss, and it's somewhat rare. So I'm farming this area over and over again, and that would have been so boring if I just did it because that's the best way to get experience. But now I'm doing that specific area because I'm trying to get that specific item. Now I can get other items on my way there, the general ARPG progression, upgrades, gear, experience. But my purpose of doing it feels good because I know that if I do this till that drops, I will eventually drop it. It's just about being patient and persistent about it, and that feels good.
Okay. Yeah. So that ties what you just said, relic, right? It's called in Last Epoch. That ties perfectly into what I wanted to ask based on what you were talking about. What do you think about having some things in PoE that are not tradable, like the Sanctum relics, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily Sanctum relics, but like in general, the idea of having some non-tradable things like that. What do you think about that?
I think that in PoE, the idea to be able to trade everything makes more sense in my opinion. But the problem is the detrimental features around it, such as stack decks and div cards, is hurting that approach. I'm definitely not opposed to the idea of it. I just don't know how that system would be implemented in a good way. I feel like PoE has this idea that you can drop big items, you can drop uniques, but in the end, unless it's a build defining or build design defining feature that you get from a certain modifier from a unique item, the idea is, in fact, that rare, big, dig, mirror service crafted items are supposed to be like the biggest you can get because of the work and requirements behind it. And I think that's a cool thing to engage with. The only thing I feel like in that case is, that obviously is only open to, that very high tippity top of the mountain is only, a fraction of the 1% player base that will ever engage with. Like a prime example of that is the helmet I'm working on that cost me 1,490.5 divines to finish, and then I'm trying to make it bigger right now. And yesterday and today I have spent last stream and today I've spent a total of 3,317.2 divines on top of that to try to hit that last mod. And that's that amount of currency. The vast majority, 99.9999% of the player base, will never see that in their lifetime of playing this game. So it's like it's such a small fraction of that. So I feel like it kind of depends on where on the spectrum you are when it comes to answering those type of aspects. And I think that having the possibility of not trading something is more detrimental than the opposite aspect. I'd rather see an improvement of target farming and actually still having the possibility of trading everything.
Yeah, it makes sense.
What's your take on that?
I think I think it's good if implemented correctly, which I think could be challenging. Yeah, that's basically my take on it. I liked it in Sanctum because it was limited to the league, and I like that you can just farm something and you have a reason to do a league mechanic. And it's not like it was like super game breaking stuff. It was, some of them were very powerful, but not like insane. But it gave you an additional reason to run the league mechanic, which I like. But yeah, it's a removal of like accessibility to certain things from the stack decks would accomplish something similar as well, like you were saying. So I think that's also a good idea for sure. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Right. Jesus, we covered quite a lot already.
I had to ask something. I forgot what ADHD brain.
So moving forward with D4 around the corner, what are you up to right now in PoE? And you're playing season 2. Are you planning or preliminary planning on playing that all the way to next PoE season? What's your plans moving forward from here?
So I still have an Ice Shot guide that I need to finish up for PoE. I found Ice Shot to be actually very, very fun, surprisingly strong, surprisingly easy to set up. Both are just like, for some reason, very strong. And one of the main reasons is the fact that they are abusing the most overpowered skill gem in the game. Do you know what it is?
The overpowered one?
Yeah. The strongest skill gem.
The returning projectiles or what?
No. It's an active skill gem.
An active skill gem? I mean, then I don't know what you would consider to be the most important one. I mean, the only thing I think of when it comes to bow builds would be like Mirage Archer or what's the spell one that triggers the abilities? That Spell Blade or whatever it was, right? Something like that.
The single strongest ability in PoE, I think, is Berserk, by far.
Okay. I'm not sure if I agree, but okay.
It's insane. It has just more multiplier plus another more multiplier, which scale off of each other, and more movement speed is just ridiculous. It's just beyond ridiculous.
Sure, but it's only usable for certain type of builds, right? So I mean,
but that's why these builds are the meta. Yeah, because the Berserk is just like ridiculously insane. But yeah, afterwards, for Diablo 4, I definitely wanna tackle all of the bosses. Like, it just experience all of the content. So I'm thinking Necro, unless I can find some other good boss killer. But Necro just feels like such a good fit. It's a very chill build for boss killing. But I'll be looking into the vampiric powers, I think. And that's probably going to determine what I'm going to be playing ultimately. But yeah, then I'm gonna be making some guides for the builds I'm gonna be playing. Definitely check out all the vampiric powers. Probably make some builds around them, and make some guides for those builds that use these vampiric powers. In the season 1, I was focusing on Necros. I was doing first. I started with AFK Necromancer. I'm just like a summoner that stands and made it tanky enough and deal enough damage because of with the automated explosions as well that we had from for the hearts, right? The caged hearts. You could just like stand in the middle of a ritual or whatever they are called, the events, right? Stand in the middle of an event and just farm obols, just like on repeat, especially in some area where a lot of people run through. You would have just a ton of stuff just while watching a show or actually writing a guide for the build while farming with the build AFK while alt tabbed. That was pretty fun. And that allowed me to just like easily level the character and then do the Bloodwave build and then also Bloodlance build, which was very fun. Just like machine gun Bloodlance, pretty fun build to play as well. I actually avoided using Bone Spear. I played all of Bone Spear in the beta. It was very fun as well, but it's just like a very, very simple build. There is not much to it.
That's true. I mean, it's like with the current iteration of Bone Spear, it's like you just need exposed flesh, I think it is. And once you have that and the recovery of primary resource on your gloves, it's like you're just critting everything. You're getting tons of resource back as long as you position yourself properly. That's it. And it was brought down to not be the best build in season 1 because of the Ring of Mendon summoner, which is so good.
Yeah, this ring was so broken. Just this ring carries so much on its own. Definitely too powerful, because it just basically your minions don't matter. You just have as many of them as possible, so you can proc as many of the ring procs.
You have like the cult leaderboard on the Paragon. That's you're only picking up a couple nodes for their defense. Then you just scale your own crit, your own vuln, all those things because the damage is your damage. It's basically similar to like Dark Pact on Skeletons here in PoE, where the damage application is just delivered on the minions, but the damage is coming from you as a player. I'm a big fan of Ring of Mendel. I think there's a really fun build to play, and that was just brought to absolutely insane levels. Me and another guy called Sinity X, we had a race to first Uber Lilith kill before season 1 and season 1 for Uber Lilith kills. He beat me, sadly. I got second world kill on it with a summoner build, but the mid-maxing in season 1 brought it to the point where in single player boss fight there, you crit over 300 million, she was gone. And in 2-player, you actually could bring that damage up to 500 million on one crit from the crit stacking heart, for example. It's just, I don't know, man. Obviously, like the changes they're doing is obviously going to drastically reduce those damage numbers because we don't have the crit stacking, we don't have some certain hearts like the Decrepit aura from the hearts that we had in season 1. So we're going to end up in a position where the damage is going to be significantly lower because from what we've seen, the vampiric powers will not even come close to that. On the other hand, the highest item power scaling is not 825, it's 925. They said 920, but it's 925. They corrected it on Twitter earlier. And I mean, that obviously scales modifiers like life, which is very big, but also armor, but most importantly, weapons. Yeah. So weapons damage is going up, and that's going to be absolutely insane.
Yeah. One of the builds I enjoyed the most in Diablo was the ranged rogue I made. I was theory crafting the build before the preseason, right before the game launched, and I figured that the best like solution to solving single target damage and clear was to actually use both rapid fire and penetrating shot, right? And then puncture for building up the combo points. And everybody I showed this to was like, what? Why two core skills? Just, But then every single ranged build either sucks at single target damage or sucks at clearing, right? So it was just like unsolvable, and it was like a perfect solution. They both scaled off of the same thing. They both scaled, you just scale crit, vulnerable, just basic stuff. But they both scaled in the exact same way, and it was like a perfect approach because we blast through the maps very, very, very fast. I played this. My plan was to play rogue because it was simply the fastest class. It has the most like ranged playstyle with huge AOE. Lots of movement speed modifiers and most mobility abilities, right? That you have because you can use multiple mobility skills, right? So that was just a simple choice, right? If you want something that goes the fastest through the game, that was the rogue, and it worked very well. Had also really good single target damage with the rapid fire. So I might look into that as well, because it was a very enjoyable build, just like the perfect build. Basically, people said that I managed to make a PoE character in Diablo because that's how it felt to people. Because it was just like zooming through the dungeons so fast.
That's
So
fair.
that might be what I end up playing as well, depending on how much you have to farm for the bosses and how, like, what's the percentage of bossing versus mapping, right? If you want to do the bosses. Might also respec for the bosses if you can like stockpile these fragments or whatever for the bosses.
Yeah.
Just like spec into like a map farmer or a dungeon farmer, farm these fragments really quickly, and then respec into a boss killer and kill the bosses.
I
Like
do
chain kill
wonder
them.
if the boss loot is going to be that both players, if two players goes in, drops the loot or not. I really hope that's going to be the
I don't
case,
know.
because that means that to speed it up, you either purchase the other side of the fragment, you farm one side, you buy the others, or you split up, so you have two players, one farming one side of the stuffs and the other person farms the other parts, and then both
Yeah,
can
it
exit
could
and be like, okay, we have the pieces, let's meet up together, let's do the boss, and then split up to farm the items and come back and do the boss as a two-man group like this. I think that
Yeah,
could be
it could
really fun.
be. Yeah, that could be an approach of like different people farm different fragments of it for the. Yeah, that could be an approach as well. One of the things I think in PoE that I let's say admire, okay, about what you're doing and people like, for example, Belton are doing, is establishing like a community, right? And establishing this community in order to accomplish like bigger things in PoE, because I think that's like the pinnacle, right? You basically, if you want to craft the best items in the game, you have to have a group of people, right? Otherwise, the cost is just insurmountable for one person, unless, I don't know, you're RMTing and you're very rich or something. But so that's one of the things that I see you do very well, and people like Belton and other people who are just creating this community of players who are just generating, all of them are generating currency, pulling it toward one purpose, right? Like some kind of a mirror craft and other things like that. I think that's pretty cool. I'm one of the things that I don't do enough, I think, is exactly something like that, like more community involved projects. I think that's maybe one of the next steps in my evolution.
That's fair. I normally spend most of my years crafting like mirror items together with a very small group of people, and that was fine when the average craft cost was only a couple of thousand exalters or divines these days. Crafting changes have made it so that some of the items I used to craft are now having an average craft cost of 10 to 12,000 divine ores, like the helmet I made this league, for example. So we did a community craft of it thanks to the Hinicore's locks that was made pretty cheap though. So we hit this, which has now been, it is a historic item in PoE. It's never been seen this good of a minion helmet that never existed before. But for the league, it's already optimal. Whereas once it go to standard, it would be better if it had conk effect. There are helmets that can compete with it. They're not better, but they can compete. So that's why we said the process that I'm doing right now is that I've already spent all the thousands of divines that I had in my team. We're basically completely drained, and now we're at the point where we're getting help from the community to pool in currency with locks like it, because the average craft cost is just the first step. We're lacking about an average of another 4,000 or 5,000 divines, and then the next process would be an average of 42 locks, which is also for double corruption, which is 63 divines. Current market price of locks is 90. That's an average craft cost of another 3,843 divines to do the next part, which will finalize it. So that's an obnoxious amount of currency, but we're taking an item that is already an historic item in the game. The problem is that if GGG adds anything that would make something like that better, that could be realistically craftable. But the steps we're doing now, because of the availability we have with the current league, we're going to take an historic item and make it so good that you cannot beat it in any sort of way right now. And that includes a corruption, so you can't even mirror service it, which means that it will be an historic item that only one is going to exist in the entire game. And the reasonable assumption of that is that when or if we finish this, it's going to be an item that can never be beaten in at least the next coming handful of years. So that's why we're trying to achieve this as a big community progress or process, right, or project. But I mean, we've spent 3,300 divines on Friday and today combined, plus the 1,500 we did before. So I mean, that's already 4,800 divines down the drain. So it's already a lot of currency. But we'll see if we
The
finish it.
locks are crazy. I wonder
Yeah.
what they're gonna go up to in standard. They're gonna be like eternal orbs.
Yeah, Eternal Orbs are going for what, a couple of mirrors each right now. So I mean, it's very likely that the locks are going to meet the same cost. The only difference between Eternal and a lock is that you can do certain crafts that doesn't have to hover an item over it, right? So there's that, right? So we'll see. It's gonna be interesting either way.
Yeah, you can make just absolutely crazy corrupted things. Like, yeah, people who have like originals. Wait, no, you don't even need originals. You can just corrupt the mirrored version, right? Or can you not?
You cannot corrupt a mirrored item, no.
You cannot corrupt. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So you have to do the original.
Exactly. So that's kind of the plan right now.
Gonna be some really crazy items out of that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like what I've done is that when we do community crafts, when I copy it or mirror service it for other people, I don't charge anything for it. I've never done that in a very long time. And if we then corrupt this and make this to a non-serviceable state, I will never sell it. It's just going to exist to show what the community has gone together and created. Look at this magnificent historic item, and it's going to sit there and rot in standard just as a display. It's like it's going to be up on like a pedestal or spotlights in the museum. You know, that's the way I see it. It's such a cool project to achieve, but it does require an insane amount of people helping out with excessive amount of currency in terms of quantity just to make this happen, and that's not even a guarantee. So we'll see, I guess. It's gonna be fun.
Yep.
Right, so we covered quite a lot. Is there anything else you want to bring up?
I think I brought most of this stuff. Yeah, the main thing I wanted to get your take on was like the idea of that limited progressive crafting, right? So like, let's say you have a currency called like an orb of refinement, right? And it would be similar, you know, it's, let's say, improves a tier of a random life modifier on an item. And let's say it can only go up to a certain tier, right? So you can limit it based on a tier. You can limit it based on how many times you can use them on a single item. So for example, let's say you have a item below level 60, you can use it once. 60 to, I don't know, 84 or whatever, you can use it twice. And let's say 84 plus or whatever, you can use them 3 times on an item, right? So you could only use that 3 times. So that would give use cases for like lower tier items, right? And that's something that wouldn't be limited by the rarity of an item, which is how GG kind of tends to do things, right? They tend to balance things by their availability, right? The more powerful something is, the less available it is, rather than like limit things by the function of them, right? So what do you think about like idea of this limited crafting approach, right? Like having crafts that people can use that are pretty much like available to people, but you cannot really make like a mirror item with it, but you can just improve weaker items that people would find off the ground. That would also help people with like utilizing items they find, right? That's one of the things that GEG tries to solve constantly. Like, why aren't people just picking up items? Because they're shit. So how about we can improve them, right? Because currently a new player has to basically replace all of their items. They cannot really improve them beyond just putting a bench craft. Because other than that, they would have to invest a huge amount of currency for meta mods and things like that. So there needs to be like a step in between. And eldritch crafting kind of fixes that, but only for 4 item slots. Eldritch crafting definitely is a good step where it kind of like bridges that gap between like super good items and complete trash, where you have like a medium step where, okay, I can do some couple annuls, couple exalteds, I can add a mod, I can remove a mod, and I can not completely break my item in the process, right? So yeah, what would be your like suggestions for that?
The problem with eldritch crafting is that it very quickly goes into the category of this is not going to be too expensive for the low end players, because it is going to be used by higher ends. So the annuls, exalted, especially the chaos orbs, goes crazy amounts because it's used for the big crafts. And so the way we talked about it earlier and mentioning like the limitations on lower end crafting, making it more deterministic, I think that would be a great addition. I think that one of the best ways to do it is to not have orbs. And I think that there needs to be a trade-off for an upgrade. So say that there's no item level restriction, but say that there's a chance every time you kill a map boss that you would be getting a charge to your bench craft, as an example, like just a spitball. Saying a charge to a craft on a bench craft, and the craft is, hey, you can spend whatever the craft cost would be, an exalted or a divine orb. Let's say an exalted, and that's gonna let you choose a modifier on your item, and it can have a bench craft as well. But that's an example. You choose a modifier on the item, and you say this one I'm gonna upgrade 1 tier, and you can only do it say once or maybe twice, and say that it can upgrade the tier 1, 2, or 3 tiers randomly. But the trade-off is that the item is, once you've done that, it's going to be corrupted. Like, not brick corrupted, but it's going to be corrupted. Therefore, you can't do it for mirror service items. You have to do that as a final step. You have the colors, you have the links, you have the items. Oh shit, if that tier was a little higher, I could have used it. I can use that craft that I got from killing a mob. And because you get that from maps, and the trade-off is the item becomes corrupted, then suddenly it's going to be less attractive for people to monopolize and trade in trade and stuff like that. It can also be limited that you can only do that on item levels. There's a lower item level and whatnot. As an example, like there's a large variety of suggestions where that could be a good solution. But that all of it weaves back to the idea that most of us that are talking about these things, the desire is not for us to have an easier time to craft big items for the end game. We are specifically and exclusively talking about helping new and newer players and the progression they go from after the campaign into white tier, then yellow, then red tier maps. The progression of their character's gear should be made more streamlined and easier for them to navigate around, and also have a more incentivizing aspect of saying, hey, I found an item base that I'm actually using. Let's say it's a siege axe, I'm using a melee build. I want the siege axe to have a good base. Let's look at this item. Oh shit, it doesn't have attack speed. I can benchcraft attack speed, but shit, that fist mod prefix, they're low tier. But if there was a way for them to bring them up a little bit, but not with a cap to not make them super big items, that would be a good feature. I absolutely agree with that.
I think that's kind of what would really help the newer players, like especially if they can find a way to teach that to players, right? So it's like two things I think we both agree on that would really benefit PoE for the new players is the game teaching the players a little bit better about the game mechanics, particularly crafting, but also other things, and also some kind of accessible but limited crafting that basically limited progressive crafting where you can kind of improve the item, but you cannot necessarily just make a crazy item out of that mechanic, right? I think we agree on that.
But I mean, I think that it all sums up like you and I seem to have very similar approaches of what we think the game could use that would be beneficial. And most of the things we talked about is very little about aspirational and high-end game player stuff. It's mostly about making the game more attractive and easier to get into, and helping, even including quality of life features for the new and newer players. Because like that's what I think is the biggest flaw of PoE. They lack the features that would weave in new players to actually keep playing or continue playing their game, and that would grow the game. And if the game grows, then everybody benefits from it. And I feel like they do a lot for us aspirational end game stuffs. It's okay. Like I get it. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I would like to have more, but I would like to see some more focus on the new and newer player aspect, because I firmly believe that if they do that, everyone's going to benefit. And if everyone benefits, then I will benefit on the high-end aspirational chase content as well. So it's just a win-win situation. So that's something that I would like to see GGG do for sure.
Yeah, exactly. 100% agree. Like, basically what you said.
So I guess that kind of sums up everything that we wanted to talk about. We've been going on for a little bit over 2 hours. So, I mean, to round things off, we already talked about what your plans are moving in. We're both going to play Diablo 4 Season 2. So how about you just tell everyone watching live right now and everyone watching this on YouTube where we can find you and what your plans are moving forward in the next coming months.
Yep. So you can find me on Asmodeus Clips on YouTube, Asmodeus Stream on Twitch. And basically, I focus mostly on the YouTube stuff. So there's going to be Ice Shot Guide coming up soon, TM. And after the Season 2 of Diablo launches, going to be doing Diablo stuff, primarily Diablo builds. If you are interested in killing the bosses, I'm definitely going to be focusing on a build that can get you to the bosses quickly and kill them basically on repeat to farm the Uber Uniques. That's going to be my focus. And in PoE, I'm mostly trying to focus now on build guides and currency guides. Those are the two main things that people are, I guess, most interested in. But I want to get better at making build guides. I think there is a lot of room I have for improvement. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do, like higher quality build guides.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And yeah, thank you so much for the chat. It was very fun. I got to ask you a bunch of questions that I wanted to ask you. We are both agreeing that shield charge is the best mobility skill, and everybody who doesn't think so is wrong.
Yeah, sums it up pretty well. No, it's a pleasure having you on. I mean, I like to have these conversations. It's not so much of a podcast. It's more like just having a conversation. We see where it goes, and we talked about quite a few things. It's always fun to do. I hope that you guys have listened, had at least enjoyed it. Maybe you learned something. I don't know, but at least you guys enjoyed it. I hope. From my take, all of the links for Asmodeus will be linked in the descriptions below. So for those of you watching on YouTube, there will be links to all of this traffic stairs to go check it out. Give it a follow and subscribe to his YouTube. And you're watching this, so make sure you subscribe to this channel as well. I mean, I'm watching you. I see the numbers, so just do that. And then, outside of that, my plan is obviously just Diablo 4 Season 2 coming around, updating all my build guides. Farm Duriel is gonna be fun. And there's a lot of other things happening podcast-wise with other people coming on as well in the coming weeks as well. So stay tuned for that. But other than that, nothing more to add. So hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, stay safe and keep rocking.